I
Oh,
got
here we
it.
go. Here we
I'm
go.
good. I'm
Okay,
good.
okay.
We're good.
Okay, so go live. I'm going live now. And we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gravity Max live stream. Today, we are talking about interstellar travel or our daily commutes. And so,
Yes.
yeah, we're getting pretty far along here in this season about space. I think, episode 8.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sebastian?
I think
How's
we've
how
come
do you like it?
such a long way. We started
Yeah.
just, here on Earth, and you could even extrapolate that out to the previous seasons. And now
Yep.
we have been just going off to the stars, and we are just on a journey. And this is the most important part of the journey, not the destination. Because the destination isn't
Oh,
as
yeah.
important as the journey. It's the journey that is the destination. And it is destined to be the journey that is your destination, which is not as important as the journey.
I'm going to go back and transcribe that and put that as a quote attributed to Sebastian.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Anyway, so today, for start, interstellar travel, we were talking about all about solar system stuff last time, and now we're branching out into the larger universe. So let's just get started.
Sorry.
All right.
Hold on, I was doing some on-stream editing
Oh,
there.
yeah.
My bad.
No problem.
Wait,
No
hold
problem.
on. And it's capturing the cursor.
Ooh.
Maybe one day we'll invent
Maybe one
technology
day.
strong
We'll
enough.
invent not to capture the cursor.
I check every single window. Capture cursor is just deselected in every single window, even windows that wouldn't even make sense.
I think it gives us character. I think the cursor is sort of like the mascot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cursor is stop it.
The cursor is stop it. Yes. All right. So visit the Gravity Max website at gravitymaxmedia.com. There's some fun stuff there about books, about news, about all the different channels and channels of previous guests and just generally cool people. So go check out gravitymaxmedia.com. Also, follow Gravity Max on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, because we put out updates about the show if there's an anomaly. For instance, 2 weeks ago, we had to start an hour early. So if you were on our social media, you would catch that. Also, I'll sometimes just put up a space news article if I'm feeling like it, so check that out. Links in the description. Also, follow Sebastian on social media and check out his YouTube channel, 128 Seconds. He makes short educational videos that are 128 seconds long, and they're the counterpart to our longer live streams. And he's also on Instagram, so go check that out. Links in the description below. All right, next. Bottled Up Flame.
The New York Times bestseller.
Yes, I don't think we're allowed to say that. Actually,
I lied.
if we're not, I lied.
Yes.
Sources say that we are the New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
That I am the New York Times bestseller. So this isn't me saying it. These are sources.
These are sources.
And as a good journalist, I will not reveal my sources. I do not betray my sources. Therefore, you can only blame my sources for what I am saying. However, you do not know who my sources are. I have one. Anyway, go check it out. It's a science fiction novel. It's the sequel to my first book that I've written, and it is pretty fun. So links in the description. Check that out. So, Daily Commute. Here we are today.
Daily
talking
Commute.
about interstellar travel, which would take much longer than a day.
In order for us
Yeah.
to deliver all the pictures of the stars and of the different planets, I don't know if you guys know this, but we manually take those pictures. Like, those are manually taken. We are going out every week and taking pictures of these stars and of these planets. To
Yes,
get the
us
Kuiper
personally.
Belt picture, that was a
That
really
is
wide
our
lens.
job.
Yeah.
Wide lens, yeah.
So this is our daily commute.
Yep.
We need to be able to get around this solar system in less than a week in order for you guys to be able to have those quality images that we pump out to you guys every week. So
Exactly.
first of all, a thank you would be appreciated. Second of all,
Yeah.
this is what we do on the daily. Let's let's talk about how we do it.
Oh, yeah. So methods. There are different methods for interstellar travel. And I mean, technically, there's an infinite number of methods. It's just about how long it's going to take and how long you are willing to wait, as with anything. Theoretically, if you wanted to get from New York City to Los Angeles, you could walk there, you could jog there, you could run there, you could drive there, take a bus there or a train, or you could fly there. Most people would opt to fly there unless they are making a road trip out of it. So that's sort of how it is with interstellar travel. You could technically get there going at like 1 mile an hour, but that would take a very, very long time. So we're just going to talk about the different methods roughly in order of increasing speed. So yeah, all right. Let's begin. First, we have conventional, and this is conventional rocketry. This involves chemical fuels, and it is pretty slow. This is what we do today to get around the solar system. This is what we use to get to the moon, and it took us like half a week to get there, half a week to get back. And yeah, so this is all sort of about the rocket equation. I don't have it up right now, but people love to talk about the rocket equation. And basically what it tells you is how much of your rocket needs to be fuel to get up to a certain velocity. And there's a few factors. So if your ship is composed more of fuel, it will ultimately get the payload up to a higher speed. However, another factor is if the fuel is able to leave the rocket at a faster speed, then you are able to get up to a faster speed. That's sort of conservation of momentum. And conventional rockets, their fuels only leave the rocket at a fairly slow pace, because these are just chemical reactions we're talking about. Mm-hmm. This is, like just taking a log and burning it in a fireplace. Of course, there are more condensed fuels than this. You could say gasoline, jet fuel. It gets up to like hydrazine, I think is what they use, and liquid oxygen. And that is very energetic, but there is a huge leap between just a simple conventional, chemical reaction and other more energetic reactions. And it relies sort of on the fact that in a chemical reaction, very little of the mass is converted into energy. Whereas in, say, nuclear fusion, about 0.7% of the mass is actually converted into pure energy. And that energy has to take some form. And that form can be heat as well as speed. So if more of your mass is being converted into energy, then you will have fuel that is leaving the rocket at a faster rate. And the result of that with the rocket equation is that the rocket can get up to a higher speed with less fuel. So this is just the worst, essentially. This is the worst kind of fuel you could use.
Beta.
I mean, yeah. Of course, you could use technically worse. I mean, I don't think you could use even, this is sort of the minimum to get off the ground, right? So how long would it take you to get to the nearest star with this kind of fuel? Probably tens of thousands of years, which is a long time.
I could check that, actually. The exact
that is longer. Yeah, it depends, because we are, slowly improving. We're getting faster and faster. But Voyager, for instance, I think would take 76,000 years to get to Alpha Centauri if it was going in that direction, which it is not. And we've got a New Horizons, I think, could get there in a little faster, but again,
yeah, I'm looking at tens of thousands of years.
Yeah, so tens of thousands of years, which is longer than written history.
Yes.
Which, I mean, just think about the development of languages. We'll talk about this more in a bit when we get to onboard accommodations, but just think of the sort of cultural drift that could occur if you have to wait tens of thousands of years to get to the nearest star system. Imagine, generations being born and dying on the same ship before they even get to their destination. That is a massive undertaking that is just kind of crazy to think about.
It's like we don't know the names of any humans that lived 10,000 years ago. And this is
Yeah.
going to be like, from what I saw, anywhere from like 40,000 to like 72,000 years to
Yep.
get there.
Yep.
So obviously stuff will be documented a lot better, but it's going to just be a different people is what it's
Yeah.
going to be. Just with
Yeah.
not human evolution, but with societal evolution, you're going to get two completely different people, from the people that got on the rocket to the people that get off the rocket.
Yeah, and so this is sort of modern technology. I don't think, unless we've gone many hundreds of years without any technological development, like if we've stayed at the same level and we're at the year like 2400, then we might send a conventional rocket. But I think most people sort of understand that it's not a good idea, I guess, to send a conventional rocket to another star. It's not really what you would use. It would be like walking from New York to Los Angeles, right? It's just much better to wait. It's an interesting thing, actually, is that if we send, like, depending on the progression of technology, there's actually the possibility that, say, we send a ship to Alpha Centauri in 2100, but then by the year 2200, there's a new, faster rocket that would actually get there faster, even though the other ship had a 100-year head start. It would be ideal not to create that sort of scenario, because imagine you're on a conventional rocket, generations, tens of thousands of years, your ancestors have committed themselves to developing the star system for their whole lives, for their whole children's, grandchildren's lives, and then you finally get there to find it like entirely colonized. Those people would be very, very upset, wouldn't they?
That sounds like the plot of a Rick and Morty episode.
Honestly, yeah. But it is possible, so that's sort of why we would want to avoid sending a conventional rocket. But again, it is technically possible. So next we've got nuclear fusion, and I guess I might as well mention nuclear fission too. I'll mention that first because it's slower. Nuclear fission isn't as efficient as nuclear fusion. There was actually there was a project. Have you ever heard of this? It's called Project Orion.
The name does sound familiar.
Yeah, so it was the idea of having a rocket that is propelled by just a series of nukes. So
right, yeah.
You have a rocket and it's carrying, hundreds of nukes. And periodically, it drops a nuke out of the backside of the rocket. The nuke explodes, and then you have a pressure plate at the back that sort of rides the wave and propels it forward. And theoretically, you could get up to 5% the speed of light with this, which would be a step up. It would be pretty fast. It would get you to Alpha Centauri in 80 years, about one human lifespan, which I would say is pretty good. It gets into the feasible range where it's like people might actually want to do that.
Especially if life extension technologies are at that rate. Again, like with technological support, if we have humans living for, I guess it'd have to be a decent amount of time. If it was 80 years, like
people would still do it, even if it's like people only live even with the same lifespan. There would be someone who would do it.
Well, it would be the thing is, it would be feasible to move. If you wanted to just move to Alpha Centauri, then that would be feasible, because you wouldn't be wasting your entire life. You'd be wasting not wasting, but you'd be using up
spending it on
like
board.
a quarter of your life, or like a third, which is still a lot. But there would definitely be people that would want to do it just to say that they did, or
for the glory.
For the glory. Or if they're just like, I really don't want to live on this planet anymore, and so they just take off.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, you could get sort of like isolationist groups to be the first people to colonize other star systems, because they are the ones who would have the most sort of desire to do so. I think we'll get to that a bit later, but. So that's nuclear fission. But nuclear fusion would do a bit better. It could get you up to like 15 or 20% the speed of light, and that would get you to Alpha Centauri in a few decades, which is it's decent. It's all right. I mean, this is interstellar travel we're talking about. And again, nuclear fusion is more efficient than nuclear fission. The most efficient nuclear reaction would be from hydrogen to helium. But of course, that is, that's the proton-proton chain. And theoretically, you could just go all the way up to iron, although it gets harder and harder to fuse these heavier elements. It takes like hotter temperatures to do so, or increasing pressure. And hydrogen would be the easiest to fuse and would yield the most energy. But yeah, nuclear fusion would go pretty well. Also, what's good about all these is that they generate electricity at the same time for the ship. So you've got 99% of this fuel that's being burned is going to the engines, but then 1% is going to supply the electricity for the ship. And yeah, so of course you'd start with an initial acceleration period and then just coast for a while. So the engine would sort of be ramped down in order to it would just become an electrical plant essentially. But because we're between stars, and when you're between stars, you can't do solar panels. Something interesting is like you have to decelerate too, which is something we don't usually think about for rockets. We've got a lot of flyby missions, and the reason that we do that, the reason you might think it counterintuitive to say go to Mercury and then just fly past it and not actually enter orbit, is that it takes fuel to decelerate, just as it takes fuel to accelerate. So the ship kind of has to carry twice as much fuel as necessary, and that's kind of rough, but you gotta do it, at least for the first ship. I imagine that you could rig up a system where once you have a developed colony, right, you could just sort of head there with only enough fuel to accelerate, and then as you're heading there, you could have a sort of service crew that comes out and decelerates you. But it would be a risky sort of thing. That would be a little risky, but if you have a good enough system in place, you could do it. But yeah, so nuclear fusion would be faster, more efficient, better. I think nuclear fusion is going to be the most important technology of the 21st century, or if it doesn't come in the 21st century, the 22nd century. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and that just hits super close to home, because when I was a kid, I would see rich people on TV, and I would waddle over to my dad, and I'd be like, "Dad, how do I make $1 million?" And he's like, "Figure out cold fusion." And I'm like, "Oh." So
Yep.
so now I'm here on this channel. But yeah, no. Yes, I am closer. I've almost perfected it.
Nice.
But
He's almost
yes, I've been doing it out of my 8th grade lab.
wonderful.
But yeah, 100% with the with nuclear fusion, with cold fusion, with all that kind of stuff, it is going to be the new quote unquote industrial revolution, like kind of what finding coal was to people of decades past. This would be the new thing that propels everything forward, because when it's finding a new resource, which we haven't done in a decent amount of time. Like, obviously we're moving towards more green stuff, like taking solar power, wind power, and we're getting better at harnessing those, but this is just to an extreme degree. This is an entirely different order of magnitude. So yeah, with this technology, when it comes out, I do think that this will definitely be a rival for the position of what makes the first trillionaire.
Yeah, depends on how quick.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I mean, because here inflation has been going up a lot, so I think that'll speed the rate at which we get the first trillionaire. Also, Elon Musk has been making this sort of meteoric rise,
Yeah. What's he at right now?
I actually don't know.
I will check.
Let me look that up.
Daily
you got this.
Elon Musk net worth
Daily
check.
Elon Musk. Yes.
All right. Elon. Why can't we have like a clock?
Yeah, that would be a great website. Elon Musk Wealth Clock. Yeah, that would be great.
All right, he's back on top. Raise another somewhere around 200 billion. I thought he passed that though.
Nice.
He's
only a fifth of the way there.
Yeah, he surpassed Bezos when he hit 185 billion. And that was at the start of February, or was that in January?
Yeah, somewhere around there. But the point is, I think trillionaire might be reached first, but I think at some point the world's richest person will be the person that figures out nuclear fusion. The trillionaire mark isn't 100% necessary. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, but it's just a cool thing to
exactly.
think about, you know.
In my books, at least, that's what happens. The first trillionaire is the guy who figures out nuclear fusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's an interesting character. He's sort of in the background, but he's also like the main character. I think of him
I would say he's my favorite
even
character.
though he's in the back. He's the main character of the series.
Yeah.
But you don't see him much in the first few books. The third book, actually, he comes into play quite a bit more, so get ready for that. I'm almost finished with the third book, and I'm going to get ready to publish that soon. But point is, nuclear fusion, very revolutionary technology, and I imagine that once we get nuclear fusion, you'll see the first people making efforts to go to other other star systems, because they'll say, we can do this in a manageable amount of time, a couple decades, let's go for it. So there you go. So the next technology is antimatter drives. So this is even better than nuclear fusion in some senses, because you get 100% mass to energy conversion, of course, because antimatter and matter annihilate one another. And you could do a bit better than nuclear fusion with an antimatter drive in terms of top speed. So, 10 to 20 years to the nearest star. However, we begin to run into, we'll get more into this in a bit, but there is sort of some merit to only going about 20% the speed of light, even if you can get up to 95%, just sort of interstellar debris. But I'll talk about that more next slide. But antimatter as a technology, the main thing, there's a few things that make antimatter less desirable, and I don't think it'll ever really be a mainstream. I imagine antimatter will be like diesel, right? You'll have nuclear fusion is like gasoline, and then the antimatter drives are like diesel. Because to create antimatter, it obviously requires the same amount of energy as you'll get out of it, and you would need to create that on some sort of particle accelerator on Earth, whereas hydrogen is just free, and you don't need to put any energy. You got to heat it up a bit, but you don't need to put that much energy into hydrogen to get it to turn into helium, compared to you literally need to create all the antimatter before you can destroy it again for the sake of energy production. But it's possible. But then beyond that, so right now we do create some antimatter in labs, but it's like a couple particles at a time. We would very much need to scale up our antimatter operations to create a sort of antimatter production line, assembly line. And we probably wouldn't want to do that on Earth, to be honest. We'd probably have like an orbital facility for that.
Yeah.
Because antimatter, I would say, is the most volatile substance in the universe. More volatile than acid, more volatile than anything.
Also,
uranium,
the most expensive substance on Earth at a price of about $62.5 trillion per gram. That's a lot of money.
Oh my god. Yeah, no one's bought that much. Someone should buy that.
Do you think we have that much in the Gravity Max fundraiser account in our Patreon?
Maybe. Here, wait. I just want to look something up. Mass to energy conversion. Because I think if someone could get 1 gram of antimatter, they essentially have a mega nuke. Yes. So that 62.5 trillion is a good price tag. I don't think anyone will be taking up the offer, because I think...
Wow, they really just put a price tag on the world delete button.
World delete button. I think nukes are probably nuclear, just uranium is probably a lot cheaper in terms of destructive power per dollar.
Yeah.
Okay, so 1 gram of matter And well, this is really 2 because 1 gram of antimatter annihilates with 1 gram of matter.
Yeah.
You get about 180 million megajoules. And let's look up, nuclear bomb joules. You got 8 times 10 to the 13 for which one? For, I guess, a 15 kiloton, which is about, it's about the same. So about a gram of antimatter is like nuke worthy. So
wow,
that's pretty crazy. That is pretty crazy.
So,
but
hold on. You said 180 million?
Yeah, million megajoules. I think you could actually. I'm gonna get put on a watch list here.
I know.
How much does a nuke cost? Because I'm pretty sure it's a lot cheaper. 28 million, I guess.
Wow.
B-61 nuclear bomb. I don't know why. There's just, I guess, so it costs 28 million.
So if it's 180 million megajoules, that is 43 kilotons of TNT.
Wow.
And
so that's pretty big.
Yeah.
That's not even the biggest nuclear bombs we have. Now we have nuclear bombs that get measured in like megatons, right?
Do we? I'm not
at least
up
the
on my
biggest one.
nukes.
You've got the Tsar Bomba is the 50 megaton.
Tsar Bomba is 50. So it's on par with that. Fat Man was 20 kilotons. Not to make light of that. That's just how much TNT it had. So you're looking at more than double that.
Interesting.
Yeesh.
Yeah, that's a lot. But again, like 62.5 trillion. I don't think it's a very worthy investment.
I would say you should spend that money in a movie theater or just elsewhere.
Just a random movie theater.
I mean,
I don't think
with that much money, you could probably get like 3 large popcorns and a water.
Yeah, true. Anyway, so antimatter drives, I would say not very viable because it's also very dangerous to hold in your storage as your fuel because the way to contain antimatter is with magnetic fields because obviously if you're like, okay, I will put the antimatter in this cup, right? Okay, let's try this bottle. There is no way to contain it with normal matter, just obviously. And so you have to use just magnetic fields to keep them in a sort of like levitating state. And if the power ever goes down to that magnetic field, because it would probably be electromagnetic, then it'll just destroy everything. So it's a very good idea to not use antimatter. I imagine antimatter, I think it'll be niche use. I think there will be some specific reason why antimatter is like better for some specific thing, right? But I mean, I would say it's possible maybe antimatter would be more widely in use for military operations because nuclear fusion cannot be harnessed for bombing very well, whereas antimatter can. And so that's just an interesting thing because nuclear fusion is like the best technology because unlike nuclear fission, there is very little risk of weaponization of nuclear fusion. So, because basically when the reactor, if there were to be a reactor meltdown at a nuclear fusion plant, right, the gas would just dissipate and then that's it. And like, oh no, 14 grams of radioactive hydrogen has entered the environment. What are we ever going to do? Versus, this city is now uninhabitable.
Yeah.
So, nuclear fusion is much better. And antimatter might find niche purposes in the future.
So, how fast could we get up to with an antimatter run engine?
I think somewhere around 30% reasonably, 30% light speed.
30% light speed.
But of course, it depends on how much you use.
Of course,
because if you carry more fuel. But
so going 30% of light speed, that gets us to Alpha Centauri at what's the distance?
4 light years.
4 light
It's pretty soon.
years.
Just like
So
12, 13 years.
yeah, that's super feasible.
Yeah.
Because then it's a 24-year round trip.
Oh yeah.
Again, it would, if we had life extension technologies and fun game party games on the ship to make the time fly by. Then I mean, honestly, we're just so conditioned from the quarantine that we would all just be fine
Yeah.
on a trip to Alpha Centauri.
Yep.
But yeah, definitely. If humans start living longer and all that stuff, then that's a feasible trip. Like you could go and you could see Alpha Centauri. Dude, that would be crazy to see it with your own at a distance where your eyes would not burn out of their sockets, but just to see it. That'd be crazy.
Go land on Proxima B, the tidally locked planet.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be cool. I would just throw stuff into Alpha Centauri just to get rid of it.
Yep.
All my notes. I have a drawer of kind of all of my school junk notes. I would just toss it into Alpha Centauri and be like, "Thanks, you got me here."
Yep. But I always scan it and put it in my Google Drive. Just save it to my computer and then throw out the paper.
Much smarter and much better for the environment and just general well-being, because that drawer is like so full I can barely open it.
Yep. I don't like to have too much paper around. That's the thing. All right, so let's go to the next one, and this I think is the best. The absolute best.
Laser sails. Even better than nuclear fusion. This could get you up to a sizable portion of light speed. Arbitrarily close, I would say. And the reason for this is that you have an external power source, which means that you can go forever. Because if we use sailing again as a sort of analogy, if you have a motorboat and a sailboat, one could theoretically cross the Pacific Ocean, and one could not. And the one that could not is the motorboat. Although the sailboat would have a rough time, because that is a very long trip. Mm-hmm. But the point is that a sailboat can keep going and going forever, as long as the sail doesn't break down. There is no fuel being expended. The fuel comes from the external source, the external environment. And that is what a laser sail does. So I think there will come a point in the future where we have laser highways between stars. And so this would require some development, and I think it's that the vanguard ship to any given star system wouldn't really be able to rely on this kind of travel. Maybe they would start off with this kind of travel, get a boost from their initial solar system, get up to, say, 20% light speed, and then kick on the fusion drives to go even faster. But the point is that you can't really do laser sailing all the way for the first trip. But once you have a system developed, you can just use this as a back and forth method. You can have two highway lanes. You have the right lane and the left lane, one going to Proxima Centauri, one coming from Proxima Centauri. And the laser sails, once you extend them, will catch the momentum from incoming light and accelerate you. And the way that you would get incoming light is obviously from the power source of the sun. The sun is a very, very powerful object. It puts out like 3.8 times 10 to the 26 watts, which is joules per second. And, we just talked about nukes and like 180 megajoules, 180 million megajoules, which is 180 trillion joules. 1.8 times 10 to the 14 is about one nuke. And the sun is doing 10 to the 26, which is a trillion times that. The sun is 1 trillion nukes per second. So somewhere in there, you'll have the fuel for a laser highway to another star. And you would obviously need extensive infrastructure around the sun to accomplish that, but we talked about that in an earlier episode about Dyson spheres, so go check that out if you want. But yeah, this is just the best technology. This is like building the highway. After the frontiers have like trekked their way through the unforgiving wilderness, the laser sails are your highway that just cut straight through, go very quickly. Road rage on laser sail highways is going to be next level.
It
It's going
would
to be
be
gnarly.
bad.
It's going to be
It would be
insane.
bad.
Just
Yeah,
people
exactly.
flying by each other, just using their
Uh-oh.
horns, but it doesn't even
Yeah,
matter
man.
because sound can't
Yep.
travel.
Sound can't. Yeah. It would have to be while we call it a highway, it would be much more akin to the sort of travel lanes for airplanes, where you don't really think about it because there's no official lane. But when a plane is going, say, across the Atlantic, there are like 8 different paths that it's allowed to take. So you'll just have some sort of air traffic control complex monitoring the highway, making sure that nothing bad is happening. And here's the thing, is that ships are going to have to be very careful to stay on course, because if you deviate from your course, so a ship that is moving at like 90% the speed of light, for instance, or any fraction, even 10% the speed of light, there's no such thing, I would say, as a civilian vessel once you're going above 10% the speed of light, once you're really anything in space. And the reason for that is that the sheer amount of kinetic energy contained within an object moving that fast is again akin to many nukes, right? So if you have a ship that is hurtling toward your planet at a fraction of light speed, and they are not communicating, they are not indicating, you're trying to contact them, you're like, what are you doing? You're straying from the agreed upon course. There's not going to be, and again, they're going so fast that they'll hit you within hours. There's not going to be any considerations of like, oh, well, we don't want to, blah, blah, blah. You are going to be laser burnt to a crisp out of the sky, and it would be justified. Just defending yourself, right? Every planet is likely to eventually have some sort of point defense system, and that could use lasers or nukes or anything to just sort of shoot rockets out of the sky. And they would have to, again, because these are such immense speeds that it just cannot be underestimated how fast these things are going.
The existence of laser sails does imply the existence of laser sailors, and the existence of laser sailors does imply the existence of laser pirates. So
it does.
I think this is the sequel to Space Pirate Hippies and the Quest for the Ninth Planet.
Oh yeah.
I think the sequel is laser pirates or laser sail pirates, and I don't know, we'll flesh this out. I'm spitballing here. Yep. Laser pirates and the journey to the destination. and we will fill in those later, or maybe we'll leave it just like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is interesting. It would have to be a very formal sort of system here. I'm not sure how piracy could work, because again, the thing is that in space there is no sort of hiding. There is no camouflage. There's no cloaking technology. They love to do cloaking technology in sci-fi shows, like, oh, we're invisible now. There is no way to do that, because you are always giving off infrared radiation by, virtue of being alive. So you will always be seen in space. And if you are deviating from a pre-agreed upon course, everyone will instantly be suspicious of you. So they will likely have procedures for, say, like, everyone on board is dying, we need to stop. They're not just going to blow everyone up. But if you deviate without following proper procedures, there's going to be hell to pay. That's how it's sort of going to be. So, yeah. All right. Oh, yes, but this could get you to the next star in like 6 years.
Yeah, which is very feasible. Yeah. So that means that we're going at,
well, it's essentially
80%
like
of light speed
on average, but it's basically that you accelerate toward light speed, get to light speed, and then, well, not get to light speed, but arbitrarily close. Then you just stay there, and then you decelerate. It takes about a year to accelerate to light speed at 1g. So pretty much just add 2 years to the length of any voyage. You're going 100,000 light years. With this method, it would take you 100,002 years to get there, right? And of course, because of time dilation, it could actually feel like much shorter, depending. It could just feel like 2 years, 3 years. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty interesting, a pretty interesting aspect. But this would be the quickest form of travel. And what makes the laser highway very good is that it clears out any space debris that might be in the way. You'd have your course, and you would very much want to protect your course, make sure that nothing gets into the laser highway, no debris, because when you are going very close to light speed, every pebble, and again, this is the same analogy, is a nuke. A lot of these things are much larger than a nuke, but the nuke is the only sort of reference we have. The nuke is the maximum of human destructive power, right? So all of this relativistic stuff is greater than or equal to a nuke. So lots of stuff like that. But yeah, so when you are going at, say, 20% light speed, and you're using nuclear fusion and you're just charting your own course, you still have to be very wary of debris. And any large piece of debris, you'll need to have some sort of laser protection system so you can just destroy it, vaporize it before it hits you. But and you could tolerate some small hits, but you'd probably have to have a shield on the front of your vessel. But again, it's just like it's very dangerous, and so that would be another reason to have the laser highway. Even if the laser highway is going to operate at only 20% light speed, it's still useful to get rid of all that debris in the way, which is what you could do with a laser. But yeah, so next. So that's the maximum really real possible technology. That's the maximum within known physics, although it would require some better technology. Depending, the laser highway could actually be done low tech. It depends on sort of brute force. There's this quote from this YouTube channel, Isaac Arthur, where he talks about a lot of similar things like we're talking about right now. Mm-hmm. And he says, what is it? It's, if brute force isn't working, you're not using enough brute force. And
I like that.
Yeah, that very much applies to a lot of things in space. You don't, like, again, you could use conventional rockets to get to another star system. It's just not a very good idea. More technology makes things easier to do. But for the most part, a lot of the things that we're talking about, you could actually accomplish with modern technology if you had enough brute force. So, yeah. But here, now we're going to talk about something that is just outside of physics. No amount of brute force will allow you to do it. And that is a warp drive. So warp drive would involve faster than light travel. And how much faster than light? It really depends. There doesn't seem to be a limit because it is, again, a non-existent technology that violates physics. So,
yeah,
why go 10 times the speed of light when you could just as easily go 100 times the speed of light? Both are just completely outside of physics. So if you're writing, if you're a writer, there's no reason. If you're already going faster than light speed, you might as well just go all the way. But yeah, so you've got warp drives. And this would just change things by really making it so much easier, by making it like, a transatlantic flight. It depending, again, because we don't know how much faster than light this is. If this is only 4 times faster than light, then it still takes you a year to get to Alpha Centauri. But if this is 48 times faster than the speed of light, you could get there in a month. It all just depends on how absurd your absurd technology is, right? But yeah, I mean, it could make it sort of like a community, like I don't know. It just depends. There's no real exact reference here.
Yeah, so
it's just kind of arbitrary. It's really just for the sake of your story. Just pick a constant and stick with it. I guess that's the lesson here. If you're writing a sci-fi story and there's going to be FTL travel, because again, we're going to talk about this later, but the length of time it takes to get between stars in real life makes it very inconvenient to operate on a interstellar scale, especially for story devices, for good plots. Mm-hmm. So that's why science fiction authors often employ the faster than light thing. And so that is what sort of happens. But yeah, so next, that's warp drives. Do you have anything else to say?
Warp drives. I knew this guy.
I like warp
I knew this guy back in the back on Earth, who would build warp drives out of nothing but a couple of styrofoam cups, some paper clips, and a half-used bag of Frito-Lays. But I feel like we're getting close to that technology.
Yep. I mean...
Yeah, so you like warp drives, you know them from Star Trek. You have the Enterprise up here. Like even the creators have come out and they're like, yeah, it's bull. Like warp 5 is like 5 times the speed of light, but warp 6 is like 5.5 or something. It's like weird. But
yeah, why is that? I imagined it would be sort of like Mach 1, Mach 2.
Yeah, no, it's not. For whatever reason.
For whatever reason, yeah.
And then it just starts going like exponential. Like,
so it slows down then speeds up,
something like that. The scale is completely broken.
Yeah,
but you know,
sounds like it.
There was like Picard who never wanted to break the speed limit. He would always go at like warp 4 because the speed limit was like warp 4. So he's like, okay, all right, we got to go warp 4, and everyone was like, we need to go faster. The universe is exploding, and he's like, no, the speed limit. Even though he's flying at, 4 times the speed of light. Yeah,
exactly. That's weird. But anyway, I mean, it's again, it's sort of arbitrary with warp drives. We have no idea what these could be. It's just vaguely. Oh, and I guess the sort of principle behind them is that instead of moving through space at a rate faster than light, you have a little patch of space that you are in the middle of, and that moves faster than the speed of light, which is theoretically sort of possible because there are galaxies at the very edge of the universe that are expanding away from us at a speed faster than light. And that is just because the expansion of the universe, the farther you are away from something, the faster it's moving away from you. So, but that's a cosmological scale. That's billions of light years away. But if we could figure out a way to do that on a small scale with a warp drive, that's sort of how you would do it. But again, very dubious, likely not possible. So next we've got portals, and this is just the logical conclusion of warp drives. This is just instantaneous travel to another star. And I love portals, to be honest. They are very much underused, I would say. In most sort of media about portals, it's like, oh, look, I can get from point A to point B faster. That's so cool. And I'm like, yes, but there's so much else you could do with portals. I have a whole video on it. You could do the classic put one on top of the other, and then you have literally infinite energy. Or you could build it into the architecture of your house. You could replace a door in your house with a portal to another house across the universe, and then bam, you have a house that is, say, equal parts in the solar system and Proxima Centauri. You could have like a duplex where you have this door and this dividing line, and this door is actually a portal, and when you step through, you go straight from Earth to Mars or from Earth to Proxima B, wherever, Earth to Andromeda, whatever you want. That portals would just make things very interesting. It would again eliminate all the problems that we're about to talk about in terms of interstellar sort of governments and organizations, because it quickens the travel time, and it would just make things very weird. I think if portals were just a thing, then society might not break down, but just our sense of geography would break down, because there is no meaning of close and far anymore. And the principle of portals sort of does lean into that, and that is that space is three-dimensional, But say that space were two-dimensional, right? This is my history homework, so I'm not going to cut a hole through it. Oh, it's on Hold's papers. So imagine, right, that the universe is my history homework, okay? Mm-hmm. And now imagine you do this, and this is a portal here. You can go from one side to the other very fast. That's the demonstration they do in literally every sci-fi movie. You know, I've seen that demonstration in like varied ways like a dozen times, delivered by a ton of different actors that are always like the crazy professor type, and they're like, oh, you could go from it's like this, and they take a pen and they stab it through the paper. It's so cliche. I watch too much sci-fi, so I'm like,
yeah, no, I totally see that though.
So and I get right.
Music
I see that all the time.
Always builds, and he's like, and you could simply,
yes.
dun dun. And then
you've got Stranger Things. Stranger Things has that exact scene that I'm talking about. Yeah. I think Interstellar has that scene. I can't think of any more right now, but it's a lot. It's a lot of things that do this exact scene with the paper, and they're like, oh. Anyway, the point is, though, since you could have portals within your own home that open up on other star systems, it makes it such that there is no scale of distance, because Andromeda might actually be closer to you than your neighbor's house. So it's like, why ask your neighbor for, say, a cup of sugar when you could actually just reach through your portal to Andromeda and get sugar from Andromeda? It's just sort of crazy, I guess, is the thing with portals. Mm-hmm. They're kind of like, it messes with everything. So if you want to, like, I want to make a story that sort of fully commits to the plot device of portals at some point, because they are just crazy sorts of things if they were to be possible. But yeah. So next we've got onboard accommodations.
Yes.
So let's talk about how it might be to go from one star system to the next. So we begin with the generation ship. And you might notice on the right this familiar 50s artwork picture of the O'Neill cylinder, because an interstellar ship is essentially, a generation ship is essentially just an O'Neill cylinder when it comes down to it. Or it can be any given space station that has 1 million people is automatically an interstellar ship, or even like 10,000, 20,000 people. And that's just, I mean, is there really that much difference between orbiting the Earth or orbiting the sun or going in a straight line to another star system, right? It's all the same to the inhabitants if you think about it, because motion is relative. So, you know, the universe is coming at you. The universe is moving, not you. You're stationary. That's, you know, Newtonian relativity, right? But the point of the generation ship is, say that you have a more conventional type of interstellar travel. Say that it's a lot slower than you would like it to be. This ship would house a society that is a self-contained, self-sufficient society that has the express purpose of going to colonize another star. And the morality of this is kind of interesting. I watched this one show. It was called like Ascension or something. And you had all these people on this generation ship. And you had these like teenagers that were born on the ship and were going to die on the ship. Like they knew that just based on the length of the journey. And they're like, this is pretty effed up that our parents did this, you know? Because if you are on a generation ship, maybe you make the decision to go on the generation ship, but you are essentially precluding your children from having the same decision, you know? You are making it so that they will have to live out their entire lives in a single town, essentially, a single town-sized object. And that is pretty messed up if you think about it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Again, man, to live on a generation ship would be kind of sad, but it would be kind of cool, but kind of sad. Mainly sad, but kind of cool.
Depends on how long. I
mean, if it's going to be a generation ship, then it's probably decently long.
Well, you know, it could be, say, 3 generations or 3,000
Yeah, I know, but that raises like an interesting philosophical question. It's like if you make the generation ship like big enough and fruitful enough, then what's the difference of living on a generation ship and then just living on Earth?
Yeah, is it moral? I mean, because I think it's theorized that like you need at least 10,000 individuals to sustain a healthy population in terms of genetic diversity, and so that is like the size of a small town, and that would be people would be stuck in this small town essentially for their whole lives. Or you could have a generation ship that has 1 million people or a few million people, and then it's the size of a country, and it's like, well, would you really mind being trapped in Norway for your whole life? It's like,
Yeah.
That's the question. Would you mind? I think you would mind, but
would I mind
being trapped in Norway specifically?
Not Norway. No.
Not Norway. Yeah, exactly.
I don't really have
Norway's
a grievance.
fine. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have a grievance with Norway. Norway's fine. Norway's pretty cool. I want to go to Norway actually, but I want to visit Norway. But I was just thinking of a country that only had a few million people. But the point is, it might be more moral the more people you have. And when we say like generation ship, it's more likely, I would say, that it's generation ships. You have a fleet. Wouldn't that be nice? You have a big old fleet. Because that could also make it more tolerable, because you could have one of the ships on the fleet that is like the cold ship based on like the Arctic, and then you have the other ship on the fleet that is like the tropical ship, so that people can see a variety of different climates, so they're not stuck on like this sort of suburban, like Midwestern looking thing like on the O'Neill cylinder, which is nice, but I imagine it could get boring, right? It's an interesting question. But yeah, the best design for a generation ship, or really any ship in space, I would say, is very long. And that is not because of aerodynamics, because there really isn't much aerodynamics in space. But again, if you are going at light speed, every object that hits you is like a nuke. So if you are a very long and skinny object, the cross section is less, right? So you're not going to be bombarded as heavily. And if you have multiple ships, the best arrangement for those ships to fly in is one behind the other. And you could also have an interesting arrangement where you have one ship at the front, and once its shielding gets too damaged, you could have it fall out, go to the back of the line, and so then it is sort of protected by the ships in front of it while they repair their shielding, and that would be just sort of interesting thing. But yeah, generation ships they would just be these sort of self-contained societies adrift in space, which is just weird. But if you send enough of them, I think it sort of lowers the moral problems with it. If you've got a few million people in the generation ship fleet, it's like, okay, it's not really like dooming someone to a life of like imprisonment, But our standards might change in the future. I don't know. It's very interesting. Yeah. Because right now, like saying you are never, and it depends on the country too, but like, because America is a pretty big country, but imagine if someone were like, you are not allowed to leave the state of Connecticut ever.
I would have an issue with that.
You would have an issue with that. I mean, obviously, because you have the option, but I mean, it really depends. Like, it wouldn't be that bad, right?
It would be horrible.
Well, that versus you're not allowed to ever leave Westport, Connecticut, right?
Ah, I see.
That's the difference I'm getting at here. It would, because you have the whole sort of domain of Connecticut to go through. You've got the northwestern Connecticut where there's like rural areas and stuff like that. You could go out, you've got the whole coast. Connecticut's a pretty varied environment for a small state, right?
Sure.
You've got the western cities that are a lot more like the suburbs of New York, and then you've got sort of the eastern even have, I imagine, sort of you get close to Boston, but of course you can't actually go to Boston because
Yeah,
you're
I
trapped.
would visit like every town in
Yeah,
Connecticut.
exactly.
I would like
I
just
think,
map it
yeah,
out, make my own maps and stuff.
I think it could be tolerable to the point that it isn't unethical, I guess. I think it could be tolerable
Yeah.
to the point that people, like that society allows people to do this. And the thing is, if you need a generation ship in the first place, that sort of means that you don't have conventional, or sorry, you don't have nuclear fusion or something. You're just trapped with conventional rocketry. Because if you have nuclear fusion, or even, Project Orion type things, you can get to the nearest star system in 80 years. So any children like born on ship, they have to spend a lot of their lives on the ship, but like it begins to get into safer territory in terms of morality. But the generation ship, if it's a conventional thing, then you could have many years of buildup of preparation for the interstellar ship, so that you could actually send like a million people.
Mhm.
Um, I would say at least 100,000 people would probably be, for just a very arbitrarily long mission, would probably be the lower bound on like morality. I don't know,
Yeah.
because that would be like Pittsburgh or something, like in terms of population, um, or like Tampa. So it's an interesting question. It definitely is.
Yeah.
Because this was sort of the norm, I would say, for most of human history. Like even worse than this, like say 10,000 people, just a tiny village, uh, which would be even smaller, just a few hundred people even. Most people would live their whole lives in this tiny village. That's what I'm sort of saying about relative differences. Because while you would probably have some qualms, like us today would have some qualms with like
Mhm.
being like, you are not allowed to leave Connecticut ever. If you went back to, the 1700s and said to some random, townsperson, you are never allowed to leave Connecticut, they would be like, I never intended to. So, but then if you said you can never leave that specific town in Connecticut, they would be like, okay, I might have a problem. Then you go back even further, and well, then you would have to say sort of Britain, like random British peasant, you must not leave this town ever. Yeah, I didn't intend to. That's the sort of thing here. Um, but as we develop further, even saying to someone, say, 50 years from now, you are never allowed to leave the United States, they might have a problem with that. Whereas I imagine we wouldn't. Would you have that much of? I mean, I would be kind of disappointed, but you've got Alaska, so you've got Alaska and you've got Hawaii. So
Mhm.
I feel like that sort of covers the range, right? Um, in terms of being trapped in just a single country.
Mhm.
But in the future, people would probably have more of a problem with that. We might even get to a point where saying you are not allowed to leave the planet would become like something
Kind of
immoral,
immoral. Yeah. Yeah, that's
which would
super.
just be
That's
interesting.
super
Yeah,
interesting. The debates of the future, like what the future debates are
yeah.
going to be. Um, I don't know. I wouldn't like it if people right now told me that I am not allowed to leave planet Earth. I would take
Yeah,
some qualms with that.
of course. I mean, it's not like, at least right now, I could see that being a problem in like 20 years, but
I'm
right now
going
it's not like
to the moon
going to the moon.
and then
Oh yeah.
retiring on Venus.
Oh yeah, that's the plan. Um, but yeah, it's just an interesting moral dilemma because up until a few hundred years ago, people wouldn't really have a problem being forced to stay in the same town. But yeah, because again, sort of if the town is too, or if the generation ship fleet is too small, then what you're essentially condemning people to is permanent house arrest, sort of permanent like parole.
Yeah.
Like people when you're on parole, it's like I think you have to stay in the same town or something, um, or it varies the sort of varied restrictions of a person's house arrest. Sometimes that can include like their neighborhood. That's essentially you're condemning innocent people to that
Hmm.
for their entire lives. That's just basically the problem summed up. Um, but of course, yeah, as you said, if the fleet is large enough, I think people might be willing to do it. I do not know. Of course, we have no reference. There has like people do not do voyages that take their entire lives. Um, you know, that
Yeah.
is just that's a new phenomenon for space. But yeah, so
But
next.
yeah,
Yeah.
just again, people going out to the glasslands at
Oh
2100
yes, the
and just,
glassland.
dude, I don't know. Again, it would be so terrifying yet
Yep.
so
It would be so like
soothing, you know?
it would be like there's a new word there has to be.
Yeah, it's like
Like
electrifying terror, but
it's like
electrifying wonder.
existential a little bit. Existential a little bit, I would say.
I would
Just
just
sort of like
say awe, you know?
awe, sheer awe. Yeah,
Sheer awe of just the absolute expanse,
exactly. The glassland.
the glasslands.
Wonderful. But yeah, anyway. So next we've got cryogenics. So this could make the trip faster, and this could allow you to have a smaller ship because if you need, it takes like an acre of farmland, say, to support one person. So if you have a ship that is going to be going for tens of thousands of years and you're going to have millions of people on it, there's going to have to be a lot of space for just stuff. And again, also in terms of genetic populations being healthy enough with genetic diversity, you need at least 10,000 people for such a long endeavor. But if we have cryogenic technology, then we could have, we could send just a crew of 12 and they're all just frozen for 10,000 years. And then they wake up on the new planet and they're like, wow, we are now here.
Yeah. And this, I think, the picture just reminded me of, there's like a cryogenic massage you can get, where they like use, I don't think it's dry ice, or it obviously isn't
I think it's
contacting
liquid
your
nitrogen.
skin. Yeah, something like that. And they like just put you in like one of those things and you just like hang out, and then they just kind of like waft the gas onto you, I guess, and it's supposed to give you, I want to try that, you know.
Yeah, actually, cryogenics are already sort of used in medicine. There's a lot of dermatology
Yeah.
that they use cryogenics for, but of course, what we mean here by cryogenics is just like freezing someone in ice or more of a liquid nitrogen substance, which we already do that too. We just do not know how to unfreeze them, which is a problem. But it's like
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out, right? And so it's actually interesting because what if we get to a point and we send a cryogenic ship, but we don't actually know how to unfreeze them yet? That might not be an idiotic thing to do, and here's why. Because the ship could be receiving constant updates from Earth. Because, again, it'll take 10,000 years, say, to get to Alpha Centauri, but on the trip there, tech updates are only a few years off. So say that you have a ship with a huge empty hard drive, as well as 12 people frozen on ice, and you have no idea how to unfreeze them, and you just send that, relying on the fact that 1,000 years from now, we'll figure out how to unfreeze people just in general on Earth, and then you beam that data up to the ship. And then the ship AI is like, okay, now I understand how to do this.
Yeah.
What do you think? That would be interesting. I mean,
it'd be super interesting. Right now, there are about like 8 people that are cryogenically frozen, apparently.
Only 8? I think it's much more.
You think so? Oh, I guess these are just this article is just 8 people who have been.
Yeah.
Just not the 8 people.
How many?
Yeah.
People
How many people total?
Cryogenically frozen. We've got, as of 2014, there were more than 300 cryogenically frozen individuals in the United States and another 50 in Russia.
Damn.
I feel like those 50 were not intentionally trying to be cryogenically frozen. This is Russia we're talking about. And a few thousand contracted members who had signed up to be frozen upon death. So.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
First of all, that like looking through that list, the majority of them had like already died and then they were put on ice.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the way to go because, you know.
Well, they were only dead for like an hour.
Yeah.
And then put on ice.
Yeah, I guess that's fine because you kind of die anyways? Question mark. I don't know. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, people have been dead for like 15 minutes before and come back.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I know that stuff.
Yeah,
exists, but I wonder if like I would
interesting,
want to
'cause it
see
only
like
costs
brain
about
activity and stuff
30,000.
like that.
Yeah, it only costs about $30,000.
Yeah, so you might as well do it. You know.
Yeah, I feel like you might as well do it.
You
Just
might as
like
well.
if you have enough saved up, you might as well just do it. Like, what is there to lose, right? I don't know. Just like stick it in your will. Just be like, okay,
Exactly.
if you have, give the rest to your kids or whatever. It's an interesting idea. So I find even 300, in my opinion, is pretty low. I'm surprised by that, honestly.
Yeah.
I would imagine more people would take it, but I guess not that many people actually think it's going to work. But it's sort of like even if there's just a 1% chance of it working, right? It's like, why not? You're dead anyway.
Why not take it, yeah.
You're dead anyway. You don't need the $30,000. You're dead. But anyway, this could be a method to get people there faster without them sort of aging to death. I imagine this would be used on quicker trips in general, and by quicker, that still means a few hundred years. Because if it's 10,000 years, it sort of begins to be like, basically, if you're sending people to another star and it'll take 10,000 years to do so, you want to send more than 12 people. Yeah. Like, you want to send more than a small crew. Because if it takes that long to get there, then you're trying to set up a civilization and you're going to need a wide genetic population. So that would be more conducive to a generation ship. Although you could theoretically have, 10,000 people on ice, but it reminds me sort of the movie Passengers with Chris Pratt.
Right.
Like,
dude, I had
anything Chris Pratt's in, I feel like I just enjoy it that much more.
Yeah. I had a legitimate heart attack when in that movie when he like wakes up out of the capsule and it's like slightly open, so he like closes it and tries to go back to sleep or something, and it's not working. He's like trying to get it to work, and so he's like, all right, so he goes to leave, but the capsule is stuck, and he's like banging on the inside of the capsule for a little bit.
He gets trapped, right?
Yeah, for like a little bit, and then it lets him out. That scared me so badly.
That was pretty scary.
I hate that.
It was such a haunted thing because it's like there's no way to sort of I agree. It's like it was such a good movie. It was so creepy, that environment.
And also the fact that he had woken up Jennifer Lawrence in that movie. Her pod didn't malfunction. Yeah. He just woke her up. I would have been so mad.
Yeah. Well, she was really mad at first, but then
she's
like, well, what else am I going to do? But it was also interesting because I saw some people talking about this edit where they start the movie with, Jennifer Lawrence waking up, and then they make the Chris Pratt part like a flashback scene later once it's revealed. Like it's like a twist. Do you think that would be a better presentation of the movie? I think it's just an interesting idea.
Yeah, actually, that would probably be better.
Yeah, they basically chop up the movie into 3 parts. They basically do Jennifer Lawrence waking up until the like big reveal, and they say, let's move that to the beginning, then move the Chris Pratt part from the beginning to the middle, and then obviously the end of the movie where the ship is like, they have to save the ship. Put that at the end.
Yeah, that'd be so much better. I think Quentin Tarantino style.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Or like an M. Night Shyamalan type twist.
No, do not speak of his name.
Do not. Okay. Well, let me tell you.
Yeah, tell me.
The thing with M. Night Shyamalan is like you've got The Sixth Sense.
Yes, a fantastic movie.
You've got like Unbreakable, right?
Debatably,
it's pretty good.
It's good. The ending's a little, but yes.
Yeah,
fine,
that's fair.
Fine.
But it's pretty good.
Good.
Okay?
It's a good movie. Yeah.
It's a good movie. But then you've got like The Happening and the
you named his only 2 good movies. Those are his only 2 good movies.
Other than Unbreakable, The Sixth Sense though.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie.
It's a very major
absolute
movie. It's a
classic.
It's
yes.
So I don't know. It's like it's difficult.
He rocked the planet with The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
and Unbreakable was it's enjoyable no matter however you spin it. It's a very enjoyable movie.
I honestly just think The Happening is hilarious, though.
Yeah, I know, but then after that, he's just delivered straight trash. So you like, either he had it and he lost it, or those two were flukes. And I just think that means that he's just not a good director. If like 80% of his stuff, I don't know how many movies he's done.
That's fair.
But I know that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I guess when I say M. Night Shyamalan twist, I mean Sixth Sense twist.
There that's a fine term to use. It's just, that name.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Because you've got the Avatar: The Last Airbender, the adaptation. Which
it's arguably the worst. It's arguably the worst movie ever made.
Yeah, I mean,
because what it does is it kind of corrupts. It takes such a good thing and it corrupts. A bad movie can be a bad movie, but to be a movie that is so bad that it actively detracts from the amazing world that was already in place, I feel like that has to...
Another concern is just in general, even if he was a great director, even if he pumped out, 5 more Sixth Senses, right?
Yeah.
I would still say he shouldn't be the guy to do an Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation because there's not a twist in that.
Yeah.
It's not a twist ending story. And his thing is the twist ending. I would have any other director do that. You know what I mean?
Also, I would say that he shouldn't do that because it's not an original thing. Because both The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable were original things. I don't think The Sixth Sense was a book. I think that was just I think that was just M. Night Shyamalan coming up with it. So I would say that he probably, if without the knowledge of all the other tragedies that he would make, I would say that he does better with original stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But yeah.
Anyways.
Anyway. So cryogenics, I would say it would just be sort of few hundred years.
Yeah, I would get frozen. It would help my pores.
Yeah, that would be sort of the ideal situation for cryogenic ships, that you've got maybe nuclear fusion as your energy propellant. That would make more sense. I must say, the whole passengers thing, the ship is so poorly designed because they're there is never, ever going to be a malfunction.
Yeah.
That violates every principle.
NASA is just crying. NASA is sobbing.
No one does that. You always have redundancies. That is what you are supposed to do. But, so I'm that ship is a freaking lawsuit waiting to happen.
Exactly.
But anyway, so cryogenics, it would likely be a lot better managed so that if you accidentally wake up mid-voyage, nothing bad will happen to you. You'll get it sorted, right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. But yeah, so finally, we've got a cruise liner. So this is sort of for your very close to light speed ships. This is for your couple years type thing.
Is that Robo Titanic?
Yeah.
That kind of looks like
I know. I specifically, I think it's from Doctor Who. When I got the image, the link said Doctor Who.
Interesting.
And I looked at it and I'm like, oh, it's the Titanic. Wonderful. Space Titanic.
Yeah, the hull gets breached and all the musicians are still trying to play their instrument, but they just immediately get sucked. They're like, we have a duty, and then they all just go down to play, but they just immediately get vacuumed.
Oh my god, yeah. Yep. It's interesting, I will say in sci-fi that holes in ships tend to be greatly over-exaggerated in terms of how bad they would actually be. Mm-hmm. The show The Expanse did it pretty well. A hole, about this big, and the ship appeared. And in most sci-fi shows, it'll be when a hole like that appears, everything gets sucked out.
Yeah.
Which is just sort of stupid because around that hole, the air will be moving at literally the speed of sound, but that's it. And actually, the way that they solve that, it's so mundane. The person just grabs a binder and just places it over the hole, and it suctions into place, and that's it. So that was brilliantly done.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the cruise liner is just a sort of awake the whole time. It's a faster journey, just a few years. This is more akin to like early exploration, although it's still longer than even all the sort of Atlantic voyages because those only took a few months. This would be more like a circumnavigation, sort of like a Ferdinand Magellan. But hopefully you don't die on the way there. Yeah. Yeah, Ferdinand Magellan, it's funny. He's credited with the first circumnavigation, although he didn't actually survive it. He didn't complete it. Just a few members of his crew actually were the ones that succeeded, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, I guess that's it. I don't really know. This is just sort of passenger ships. I mean, I can't really think of anything specifically.
Yeah, and there'd be fun stuff on the cruise. Lobster, lobster bisque every night. You got some, you know, you got all that nice thematic food as you're traveling through space. You got your mite bites. You got your everything.
So, oh yeah, the mite bites.
Mite bites. I want mite bites. We should make that.
Yeah, we should make that. All right, now we get to the fun part. Empires. Let's talk about empires.
Where there is land, there shall be people to rule it. And empires, I mean, it's just a lot of land in the hands of a very small amount of people. So, when we were granted the knowledge about the universe, about how expansive it is, if your mind didn't immediately go to, I should buy some of that, you're thinking in the wrong way, partner.
Yep. People love space empires. Space empires are like a favorite of sci-fi.
Yep.
Although I think in terms of a government structure, it's probably one of the weakest for Interstellar. But so when we say empires, we really just mean countries here. But you got to go for the dramatism.
You got to go
Empire.
for the dramatism.
The Empire.
Yes.
The first Galactic Empire.
The First Order.
Yes, exactly.
My power is unmatched.
Yes.
All right.
All right. So we begin with communications, and this is the first, basically, presentation of the problem.
Yeah.
And the problem is that any communication will take multiple years to get between stars. And we're assuming no FTL for the rest of the video, essentially. So it takes many years to get a message anywhere. Any sort of message, whatever the message may be. It'll take a few more years to get supplies there, at least, whatever the supplies are. But the communication lag is just very, very concerning. So something interesting is take the War of 1812. The War of 1812, fought between America and Britain, ended in 1814 after a peace conference in like Paris or something, right? But before the ships that like were carrying the message that the war was over, before those ships could get to New Orleans, there was a battle that was going on where Andrew Jackson, future president, would have a big victory. And this is largely where Andrew Jackson got a lot of his fame, is from this battle in New Orleans. And this battle technically occurred after the peace treaty was signed, but it took many weeks for the ship to get there, to get the information there. And if you think about it, if they had had instant communication, if they had had iPhones in 1814, Andrew Jackson would never have been president because he wouldn't have gotten this claim to fame from this battle. So that's just a very interesting sort of thing. And this is incredibly magnified on the scale of interstellar space because Alpha Centauri, 4 light years away. So if you have, the War of 1812 and it ends in 1814, the people on Alpha Centauri don't know that until 1818. And that's a problem. That's just the basic problem presented here. This makes trade difficult. It makes all sort of things difficult because imagine you say like, oh, Alpha Centauri, we would be willing to buy, $100 trillion of crops from you. And it takes 4 years for the message to get there. And they would have to say either yes or no. Or like imagine it takes 4 years for the message to get there. They're like, okay, yes, we accept the offer. They start growing the crops, and they're about to send the crops over, but then like they've gotten a message that's like, oh yeah, we forgot about that like 8 years ago. We don't care anymore. We don't want your crops. We're not going to pay anything for them. They would be like infuriated, and that would just be a problem. Procedures will have to be put in place. And another problem is that of governance. It makes it very hard to govern because laws and edicts cannot get out at an instantaneous rate. So, I mean, just think of Congress, right? American Congress. In this system, if you have, the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and you have the 51st state is in the Alpha Centauri system, any law that Washington passes, that Congress passes, it will take 4 years for that law to get to them. So Prohibition started in like 1919, right? So imagine that's passed, that amendment is passed. They don't find out about it for another 4 years. Also, they would never know who the current president is, which is with certainty. They would find out 4 years later, and he's either been reelected or a new person has been elected. They would never know who the new, that would just be crazy. Imagine, you would never actually know who your president is. And how could you vote in an election? How could Alpha Centauri reasonably vote in our election? Because they are, again, 4 years behind, which is conveniently like exactly one election cycle. So they would say like, oh, we have, however many, we have like 1 million votes for Hillary and 1 million votes for Trump. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, right. Sorry about that. That's not happening anymore.
Imagine if their votes had to be counted.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work. You would have to greatly extend the period of any sort of ruler's reign. You would have to make it like, probably 20 years or something like that, like, which I would not, people would not be a fan of having the same president for 20 years. People get very tired. The 8-year term limit, right, is like, for the most part, unnecessary because usually people get tired of the person by the time that 8 years are up, although sometimes they don't, like FDR, and it depends. I mean, basically, if you had a person of the same party run again afterwards, then sort of likely, like, I don't know, maybe Andrew Jackson could have gotten a third term if he ran, but instead he had Martin Van Buren do it. Possibly Reagan, although he was very old, but like, he basically just had his vice president. Basically, whenever, I just in my mind, I imagine that whenever a president serves for 8 years and then their vice president gets elected, it's like they were probably popular enough to get a third term if they wanted to, but we have constitutional restrictions on that now. So for the most part, we as Americans want a new president every 4 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. And so this just makes it sort of incongruous with the Alpha Centauri system. Alpha Centauri, under our sort of government structure, would need to have some sort of semi-autonomy. So you would have the US president, and then you'd have the Alpha Centauri president. And we both agree that we're part of the same country, but they have their own, like the governor has the same power as the president there. So that would be very strange, but it's again, it's just crazy. It would also sort of slow things down because whenever you have, say, a constitutional amendment, you would have to have that sort of like wait a few years to get that into effect. But you could sort of do constitutional amendments. Constitutional amendments, I imagine, would work fairly well in this system because those are slow, measured government steps. But another interesting thing is, again, if we think about the Congress and how Alpha Centauri is, 4 years behind, say they have, 2 senators and a congressman, they would elect those people in, say in 2020, they elected their people. But those people, it would take them 6 years to get to Washington, their terms would be far over by then. But theoretically, you could have a system where it's like, in 2020, the people of Alpha Centauri vote for who they want their representatives to be in 2026. Mm-hmm. And so then by the time they get there in 2026, they serve until 2028.
That's super
But that's sort of,
dangerous, though, because if
yeah,
that person just came out with something completely insane during those 4 years,
they
people
would have
would be
no
like,
idea back on Alpha Centauri. They wouldn't find out until, you know, far after. So it would really mess things up. This whole
yeah.
interstellar mumbo jumbo, it very much messes things up. And so
I
yeah,
would say
let's go
that
into
that's
political
probably.
structure. But yeah.
I would say that this is probably the biggest thing stopping an empire from working is that the
Yeah.
territories can't talk to each other.
Yeah.
Because when you don't have that, then you don't have territories. Because the territories
Exactly.
will, of course, just become their own thing.
Yep.
So, I don't know. That could possibly be a thing. I doubt that they would use, like, that would be an oversight. But I could see, for example, in some storyline that a big empire, takes over all these territories, but they can't communicate with them, so they all just
Yeah.
devolve into
They just lose
smaller
them.
stuff. They just become subsidiaries of each other, and so now you got like, seven empires all against each other and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. The big problem is that you can't effectively conduct warfare. But we'll talk about warfare in a bit.
yes.
But yeah, so political structure here. So I would say the best political structure, and when I say best, I mean like the only sort of functional one that could work across star systems, would have to be some sort of semi-autonomous system where each local government essentially rules its own people, but they could be tied together by like a constitution. And then you could have, say, a constitutional convention every 20 or 30 years that's like a regular thing. And so people know, okay, we're going to elect our delegates for the constitutional convention, send them over. It'll take a few years. And the whole process from voting for the delegates to finding out the new amendments could take like a decade. Like, it's tough, but I would say it's possible to do that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Versus being an entire presidential election cycle behind every single time, which just does not work. So you couldn't really have a centralized leader. This is interesting. What would you do about that? Right? Like,
Yeah.
this is where I understand the sort of empire stuff, because you could have a dynasty, like a monarchy, because that functions independently of the people. Essentially, that's just whoever my son happens to be is now the emperor, right? Which is like, okay. But if the emperor rules with too much of a death grip, there's nothing stopping. I mean, there's very little stopping any random star system from just saying, we are out. We're done. We're not in the Union anymore.
Yeah.
And we'll get to warfare in a bit, but it's just interesting. I think the environment necessitates a very, very loose sort of government system. Each star system would have to have its own capital, and it would have to be just like the EU, I imagine. Like, I really don't think you could do anything. It would just be sort of a loose sort of confederation. You wouldn't have a president. I mean, interestingly, if you go back to the Articles of Confederation, which were before the U.S. Constitution, they did not stipulate a president. It was just Congress. And Congress needed essentially 9 out of 13 colonies to agree to do anything. Mm-hmm. So, 9 out of 13 states. They were states by this point. But it's like, it's sort of crazy the challenges this presents. If you were trying to hold together, like, what would you do if you were a delegate to, I don't know, the Constitutional Convention? How would you try and like make a union that would last?
Threat of death.
Threat of death? Yeah.
Threat of death. Microchips in every other delegate.
Uh-huh.
I'm the only delegate without a microchip, but they don't know that. I act like, oh no, when I put my, persona on and I pre-record a message that goes out to everyone, and it says, you have a microchip, and then, I just let one of the delegates from Palace Prime go, because we need to get them out of here anyways. And then everyone's like, oh no, I have a microchip. And I'm in there in the audience. I'm like, oh no, And then it's like, you have 24 hours to submit your complete allegiance to the Intergalactic Confederation of the Union,
Yeah.
And all that.
Yeah.
I think way too much about this.
Yeah. I could see future despot here. We've got probably you could get at most a few dozen star systems into a loose sort of Articles of Confederation / European Union style thing.
Mm-hmm.
They would probably have to make secession legal. Just say you can leave whenever you want. Otherwise, because again, it would be very difficult to fight wars. So they would probably have to code that in from the beginning, saying you can leave if you want to, right? But so sort of like the EU, you've got the Brexit, right? But it's just a very interesting sort of situation because, again, Proxima Centauri is just the closest star. So you could imagine having these systems that span a few dozen light years, and all these processes are just slowed down. Mm-hmm. You'd have to have so much. You would just need so much self-autonomy here. The only sort of general laws would have to be do not attack fellow members of the Union. Do not
attempt to remove the microchip.
Yeah, do not attack fellow members of the Union. If you want to leave, you can by some process. If you want to conduct in trade, this is how we conduct trade at the most. That's sort of even that general rules for trade, that might change over time. That begins to get a little dicey in terms of having that be required. And then just sort of Bill of Rights stuff you would have to include. But that's about it. You really couldn't have much more. You couldn't have, say, like a 16th Amendment. You can't have federal income tax, right? Because you would say, each state would have to have its own sort of tax system. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe you would have to, because originally before income tax, what they did was instead of going to each individual, they just went to each state and said, state, we require funds from you. And they'd be like, okay, here you go. But maybe they could do something like that, but a problem would be any sort of financial system. Because again, imagine if one state falls into a depression, right? And so then the money stops coming to the federal government. And they're like, oh no, but that star system has just been on its own, suffering through a depression for 4 years with no outside relief. They would have to be very self-sufficient. So yeah, you've got all these sort of things. So I guess in conclusion, I imagine the most tenable interstellar political structure would be some sort of war union, some sort of military union that agrees on a basic code of human rights and rules of engagement. And that's about it. With some periodical updating process. What do you think?
Yeah. With the updating process, that's definitely what's going to need to be, just because of the communication issues, as well as and this is another thing, when you get things that are entire star systems apart, they might have different challenges. For example, a massive meteor might be heading towards one place, and because it's now an empire, that meteor is not heading towards the capital, but the capital still needs to address that kind of stuff. So then you get other stuff like that. They're like, hey, our star is looking a little wonky. Can we do some research to make sure it's not going to go out?
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff like that.
Also, the constitutional process would have to be periodic, because to call a meeting, right, you would have to say, guys, let's have a meeting. And then 4 years later, some people might say, oh, I don't think we need a meeting. I think we do. And then, of course, there are farther stars 8 years later would say, oh, blah, blah, blah. You would need to have okay, 2025, 2050, 2075, we will have a meeting. Be there or be square, right? So, yeah. But yeah, sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, yeah, that's basically how I was gonna wrap it up. Is that you're gonna get, and again, it in pretty much every case, it's just gonna devolve unless you go with the Molino microchip strategy, or the MMS as I like to call it.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, other than that, honestly, an empire probably isn't going to withstand unless we have portals and stuff like that, because then that's an entire thing. But obviously, we said that we're not taking that into account. But go to Star Wars. The reason that the Empire was able to be the Empire is
because they have FTL.
Is because they have FTL is probably the biggest thing. Obviously,
if you removed FTL from Star Wars, like in a day, it would just evolve into chaos. Every single star system would be on its own.
I mean, Han would be like, Chewie, hit the throttle, and they'd be like, okay,
and it would just be like click.
And they would just
click,
be
click.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, we are stuck in literally interstellar space. Uh-oh.
Or it's even Star Trek, and he's like, Sulu, get us out of here. So he's like, aye aye, Captain.
Click. Oh. And then they get blown up.
So, they're just devastated by the Klingons.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, yeah. So political structure, think like the EU. But I feel like even what the EU is today would probably be too much for the interstellar space in terms of cohesion, in terms of centralized power. I think the most comparable thing I can think of would be Articles of Confederation. Yeah.
Comparable? Definitely, but...
Because that was mostly just a military union. You would also, I imagine, have some sort of international court, because the court, and in this case, interstellar court, because court tends to function a lot slower than all the other branches of government. So you could, I guess, have a process that takes decades to overturn legal decisions, which is sort of honestly how things work right now, But of course, that means you can't include a right to a speedy trial in the Bill of Rights for this interstellar union. But yeah. I always find it funny, the whole right to a speedy trial thing, because it's like, what do we define as speedy? Like,
I'm telling you, that highway road rage, people are like, someone just goes right by someone and the guy, oh, okay, buddy, and pulls up next to him, and somehow they're talking, like, he just tunes into his, like, radio broadcast.
He rolls down the window, but all the air gets sucked down.
He, like, rolls down the window, he's like, hey, he just goes straight
hey, pal.
up. But he's like, hey, friend, literally an infinite expanse. Why are you so close to my my ship, man? And the guy's like, you know what's funny? And he hits FTL.
Yeah, exactly.
Leaves. But all that stuff is going to be... FTL is just, game changing.
Yeah.
Is it going to happen?
I don't think so. It's not inevitable. That's the thing.
I don't think so. Well, you would say that nuclear fusion is inevitable, though.
I think so, because we actually do have nuclear fusion today. It's just that it takes more energy than it produces.
Well, yeah, so the cold version of that.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be cold, I don't think. It just needs to be more efficient.
Yeah, net, you are not wasting as much energy. So not
basically, it takes a lot of energy to get it up to the proper heat, right?
Well,
but once it's at the proper heat, the proper temperature, then the energy it is producing can resupply its temperature.
And that's what I'm talking about. Getting it to, finding some catalyst or something that allows it to occur at lower temperatures is cold relatively, but that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Or just like really efficiency of collecting more energy.
So I would say it probably is inevitable.
Just basically, if you look at sort of our current nuclear fusion experiments, and you just look at it over time, you'll see the trend of energy in versus energy out going up. Yeah. So I think it is inevitable, but FTL is just not inevitable. That's the thing. It could happen tomorrow, you know, I mean, someone could slip on a banana peel, hit their head, and like, oh, I just figured out FTL travel. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's completely random. Uh, like, it's not like any sort of stages of development, you know? Because if you imagine, like, you think, okay, if you look at a society that's say an alien world and they don't have electricity yet, you can safely assume, oh, okay, they can't develop computers tomorrow. They need to do electricity first, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing doesn't really apply to FTL. It's not like you have some sort of requisite thing you need because it can just happen whenever, because it's just like outside of the progression tree, you know, the skill tree. But yeah, so let's go to like politics, the next slide. And
Yes.
so now we're talking about political parties. So it's interesting. What sort of political parties might you see in the future? They would, for the most part, you would have to have local parties, and by local I mean in a single star system, because again, this is like a loose military, maybe some trade, like human rights sort of union. But you could have some parties that are like, I don't know, like I would imagine the biggest parties would be sort of federalist and anti-federalist, like we had basically during the AOC Articles of Confederation time. What do you think? What do you think?
So with just being in space and doing all of that stuff, if depending on the state of technology, and the state of technology would have to be pretty advanced for this stuff, I do think that there would be a higher emphasis on, yes, the local community and of just general libertarianism, because it's, again, going back to the space pirate hippies, it is now much easier to just go and start your own thing with a bunch of buddies. And that having that option, especially for young people, and again, we don't know how long people are going to necessarily live, so that could be anywhere from 12 to 108, but the thing is that
12 is the lower limit. People do not die at 11.
Yes, no, people do no, I just meant
young
people
until the age of 12.
No, those are kids, but so because you have that option, it's just much more enticing. If I had the option to go and just start something in the middle of space with a bunch of my buddies, then I would totally do that. And
of course,
if someone told me that that I shouldn't be allowed to, I would be opposed to them. So because the floodgates are now open for that kind of stuff, you're going to get a much stronger libertarian party than we just currently see.
Exactly, because if you have a law that says, like, for instance, like today we have, say, marijuana is illegal, right? If you have a colony, or any group of people that does not like that law, they can literally just say, you know what, we're just going to go out into space and violate that law, and there's very little you could do about it.
So it's just going to be secession to the max. So you're gonna get a lot of libertarian-esque colonies around a specific star system, and then at the center core of it, you're gonna get the more unified, more authoritarian stuff. The people that want to stick together, and all of that stuff. And but in terms of wanting to impose general laws on everyone, if we are looking at it from like an empire scale, you're going to get the libertarian colonies are going to be disenfranchised just because they don't have unity. So you're going to see the top parties being the authoritarian ones, and then it's just a battle between the authoritarian parties. You get the guys that want the Karja route from a Pirellius Daxton to be illegal, and then the guys that want the Karja route to be legal.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because there's a lot of sort of unenforceable laws. And well,
That's the thing,
the
yeah.
enforceability of a law just depends on the people's will to enforce it. So, I mean, recently we have in the new COVID relief bill, they want to make a federal $15 minimum wage, right?
Hmm.
And if you had a something like that, right, and you had an one star system was opposed to that, they could simply refuse to comply, just not do it. In the first place, the law would take, 4 to 8 years, depending on how far away from the capital it is, to even get the information there. And if they decided to simply not even refuse, just to say, yeah, we're just not going to enforce that whatsoever, then the news that that is not being enforced would take 4 to 8 years to get back. And so then what would happen? You could have lawsuits, but those would be very, very slow lawsuits. Like the whole process, I imagine, could take up to like 30 years, to force them to do that. And it wouldn't even make sense practically because you would risk dividing the union for the sake of some tiny law. So that would never really happen. You wouldn't send federal troops in to enforce something like that. And that just, but, right, if you were to say have freedom of speech, First Amendment, some sort of First Amendment equivalent in space, and some member of the union was deciding not to enforce that, you would have probably every other member of the union being like, what the hell? We don't like that. You're not allowed to do that. You're violating people's rights. We are going to send our military forces to stop you from doing that, right? That is a law that is probably enforceable because of people's will to enforce it, everyone else's will to enforce it. Whereas minimum wage law would take, at best, it could be something that takes like 20 years in interstellar court until it finally passes.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you have basic human rights being violated, people will likely go on the offensive. And that's sort of why I lean on thinking that this is more of like a military union. So if there's a threat from some external power, the union will counter it as a group. And if there is a threat from an internal power, again, they can conquer it, prevent it as a group.
I see it as kind of a semi-permeable governmental system, kind of, because just if you just think of the diffusion that you get, because you have so much space, you now have an infinite area to cover. You cannot do that. And you're gonna get geniuses out there that are just able to kind of outpace people or hide in certain corners of the galaxy. Like the space pirate hippies. But other than that, it's just going to be. I just see it as so incredibly difficult to enforce, like just general law, that only the most grievous of, like, if you blow up a planet, will you be persecuted? If you take out a governmental leader of a colony, will you be persecuted? But doing stuff that is by law illegal, again, with just the emphasis on personal colonies, I think it's so difficult to enforce.
You could even, exactly. Like, you could have some unions that are just a sort of literally just do not attack anyone else within this union.
Yeah.
And if a member of the union is attacked, rally behind them. You must rally behind them.
Yeah, and again,
you could have a union. I would say that would be the largest, like the unions I was talking about before, where you have some sort of laws, could probably only span like a dozen or so light years at most, but you could have a maximum sort of union that's maybe like a 50 light years wide, maybe a bit more union that's just a simple military union that is like, we do not care what you do within your own star system. You can literally, just murder every third child. We do not care. Just don't attack us and protect us when we are attacked. You could have something like that might be sustainable over a larger area. But it's basically the more control you want to exercise, the less area you can exercise it over. It's a simple proportionality, I would say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so just very interesting. Every star system, mostly for its own, every star system for itself, or small sort of military unions. That's it, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right. Trade.
Yeah.
So
Stonks.
where do the resources go for the, again, because you now have different star systems with different planets. Ideally, you're going to get new resources found, kind of. Like one can hope, but more realistically, like other than finding extraterrestrial life or extraterrestrial plants or stuff like that, it's just going to be who has the biggest abundance, who has the biggest abundance of iron, who has the biggest abundance of sulfur, oxygen, or hydrogen, all that kind of stuff. That's what I see being primarily traded.
Yeah.
Other than, so that's where, at the resource level, that's where that goes. Other than that, it's going to be manufacturing pretty much solely, because now that we're spanning galaxies and we no longer have comforts like gravity, stuff like that, or a fast means of travel, you're going to need people to manufacture the transportation. For example, you're going to need someone to manufacture the antimatter engine that you're using to zip around the galaxy, because you can't really make that out of just a couple of rubber bands, paper clips, and a half a bag of Frito-Lays. But the thing is that in and of itself might be the biggest draw towards staying in a union with
just
direct ties. Yeah, just the resources, because it's going to be so difficult to put together a ship that can take you across the galaxy. You would probably need to like work for that in some way. Depending on the resources, I don't know how common that would be. Like if it's as common as a car, then I could see that definitely. Then in that scenario, libertarianism would still take a very large hold. The only reason you would go back is to like get your car fixed or stuff like that. To get your antimatter engine touched up from the space mechanic.
Yes.
Not to be confused with the quantum mechanic.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereabouts unknown.
We haven't talked about him in a while.
We haven't. Maybe he's making a comeback. Who knows?
Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
So I would say that those kind of dependencies would be the biggest draw towards the middle. Like the comforts of that stuff would be the biggest draw, because again, I do wonder whether people will stay in big cities like Neo Angeles or Palace Prime, or if they will tend more towards the libertarian colonies. I think it really depends on the mindset of that society, which is impossible to nail down.
Yeah.
Because of how
Imagine the space farmer with the, straw in their mouth, and they're like,
yeah.
And I'm like, I'm here protecting my farm.
If you step on my farm, I'm gonna use my space laser.
I will use my laser gun.
We
my
don't
laser
want
shotgun.
No Neo Angeles boys trespassing on. Yeah, but anyways,
it's getting bad.
It's getting bad.
It's getting bad.
But the thing is that with the comforts that a city brings, just like today, with the comforts that a city brings, that's the biggest draw to a city. The top 3 reasons people live in a city is convenience, quality of life in some aspects, and their friends live there. Those are the 3 biggest reasons people move to cities. Or they just, enjoy cities. I enjoy cities a lot. But the thing is that it's really going to depend on like the ethos and the mindset of that society, which again was tough to predict.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I would say in terms of material trade, it's likely to be very sparse. And the problem is that, well, there's a few things. Star systems are incredibly plentiful. Like the sun, right, produces so much energy. But more than that, it also has so many resources inside of it. I think there's something like 6,000 Earths worth of iron in the sun, like literally within the sun, because it has a high metallicity. And so I could see some sort of trade between very highly developed star systems of the high metallicity solar systems exporting iron and stuff like metals to low metallicity stars, and those stars sending hydrogen and lighter elements to the higher metallicity stars. And basically metallicity in a star is just the fraction of things that aren't hydrogen or helium that are contained within the star. And that all depends on the star's age. The older stars have lower metallicities because they were created when the universe had like less heavy metals in it, right?
Yeah.
I can see that as a potential, but again, the thing is 6,000 Earths worth of iron. Even if you had a star system that had only 600 Earths worth of iron in it, it would take a while before you decide, hey, I need to trade with someone. Also, if we figure out like mass particle colliders, you could, turn hydrogen into helium, right? Turning hydrogen into helium is likely to be routine, again, because of nuclear fusion. But when it comes down to it, you might decide, you know what? We're just going to fuse all the way to gold. We need some gold. You can literally achieve the alchemist's dream of turning lead into gold. It just takes a lot of energy to do so. But you know what else takes a lot of energy to do? Interstellar travel. That's something I guess we've been glossing over a little bit, but it takes immense amounts of energy to accelerate something up to a significant fraction of light speed, because the equation for kinetic energy is m/2 times v squared. So mass divided by 2 times velocity squared. Now, if you have an object that weighs 2 kilograms and you want to accelerate it up to 100 million meters per second, which is a third of the speed of light, that would require, 100 million is 10 to the 8. So that would require 10 to the 16 joules of energy, which, again, I think is more than a nuke. That's just 2 kilograms, right? Just 2 kilograms. 10 to the 16 joules of energy. That is more than it dwarfs any sort of single project, any hydroelectric dam. If we were to cover the whole surface of the Earth with solar panels, I think that would even, 10 to the 16 joules would take up probably a few minutes of that, right? And that's just for 2 kilograms, So in terms of raw resources, it's going to be very slim. And then manufacturing, too, I think will be very slim because, again, it's all about expenses. If, how much cheaper could it be to have something produced overseas, right? I mean, say that the neighboring star system has wages that are a tenth as high as your star system. The cost of shipping that material is going to recoup that very immensely. The only possibility for manufactured goods I see, and this is an interesting one, is the example of silk from China in the very early Middle Ages and stuff. When you want, it was a state secret, essentially, at that point. The silkworms, if you tried to smuggle, silkworms out of China, the penalty was death. Isn't that interesting? And This is, ancient history. And the reason for that was that China, they were the only ones who had the silkworms. They were the only people who could produce silk, and everyone really wanted silk. So it was okay, we have to buy it from them. We can only buy silk from China. We've tried to have our agents smuggle it out, but they were caught, and they were all executed. So I guess if we still want silk, we have to buy it from them. So if some star system develops a new technology, they might decide, we're going to keep this a closely guarded state secret. No one's going to find out, and now people have to buy it from us. However, that is... It's probably difficult, I would say, to do that, because I would say it's gotten harder and harder to keep a secret. Currently, there's actually, with China, ironically enough, there's a lot of sort of intellectual property disputes where China is using sort of American patents without paying for them, and so America is saying, you can't do this. This is theft. theft of intellectual property, and China's just like, haha, I'm going to do it anyway. But America did that too in like the 1800s. It's interesting. Again, you had people, right, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, in Britain, they invented the spinning jenny and the cotton, the like textile looms, all those different things. Most of the like Industrial Revolution machines were invented in Britain. And you would have American agents, or even just anyone who was being paid to do so. They would try to smuggle those patents onto American ships and get to the Americas. And when they were caught, I'm not sure the punishment was death, but I think it was severe, right? Mm-hmm. Never underestimate the lengths that people will go to protect intellectual property. And so that, I guess, brings it around to, I believe intellectual property will be the greatest source of trade in between star systems. And here's why. It doesn't take much energy to transfer, literally just a beam of light, right? And so say that your star system has a ton of new technological developments, and the neighboring star system also has a ton of new technological developments, but the two of you have different technological developments. If you agree to trade those developments, you just get free patents in exchange for patents, right? Also, you could have entertainment. Entertainment is also intellectual property. So you could have all of the movies from one star system and all the movies from the other star system, and they trade, right? And books and stuff like that. So I think that's the most likely. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because there's no or very little transportation cost. It's just information, literally.
Yeah. No.
And
yeah, absolutely. With the intellectual property stuff, that stuff has gotten very muddy here on Earth. So.
Oh yeah. DMCA.
Oh yeah. I just want to stay at the DMCA.
And that song itself is intellectual.
Yeah, imagine we get copyrighted for that. That'd be hysterical.
Exactly.
It wouldn't be.
But it would not be. Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Yeah. So yeah, that stuff, they would go to the ends of the earth and beyond to exactly. enforce that kind of stuff. So you're definitely still going to see it.
Yeah, but it would be so hard to enforce that I think it would sort of be any given piece of intellectual property would sort of be a depreciating asset, because over time it's more and more likely that someone else is going to find it out, or like someone else is going to smuggle it out of the star system, or that just another star system is going to independently develop it, right? Because that happens all the time. So you would likely want to sell it as soon as you possibly can. And so this also brings up interesting things for, say, an embargo, right? Say that you've got a star system is, suppressing their free press for, to protect their government leaders, right? Their government leaders, they don't want to look bad, so they suppress the freedom of the press. All the neighboring star systems could say, we don't like that. We are no longer going to send you any intellectual property until you cease that action. That would be the embargo of the future. And that could be a pretty impactful embargo, because imagine if any given state in the Union, like Connecticut, imagine if Connecticut was no longer allowed to receive any technology updates from any of the other states, and they just had to rely on their own, right? The sheer volume of patents from an entire country far dwarfs that could be accomplished in a single state, right? And so that could be a big threat. That would be, you would want to avoid that. So you'd sort of want to play along, follow the rules of the Union to avoid getting embargoed. Because, that's just so crazy to think about But, it would be impactful. Because imagine if one state in the Union was doing something illegal, unconstitutional, doing something immoral in the year like 1990. And they were just, all right, you're embargoed. And imagine if they missed out on 10 years, say that it took them 10 years before they agreed to get back into before they stopped violating people's rights, right? And imagine from 1990 to 2000. Think about computers in 1990 compared to computers in 2000. All of the technological advancement that they would miss out on over the course of 10 years. That is a big threat. Imagine being 10 years behind the technology like that would lead to discontent. That would be a major sort of embargo thing. And that's kind of like what we do today, except of course it's with resources. We have sanctions on different countries because we don't like what they're doing. I think that was sort of the Iran before they had a nuclear program. I forgot if the Iran deal lifted the sanctions or if they put the sanctions in place.
I'm not an expert on that.
I believe the Iran deal was like, okay, if you agree to allow us to like inspect your facilities to make sure that you're not making nukes, then we'll lift the sanctions. I think that's what it was about. I'm not an expert, but just it doesn't really matter the specifics, right? That's sort of what we do. It's what we do today. We say, we're not going to trade with you because we don't like what you're doing. You are building nuclear weapons. We do not like that. Obviously, we do not want you to be building nuclear weapons, so we will not trade with you. You could get an equivalent in this sort of interstellar union. So that would be just an interesting phenomenon. But yeah. Also just movies and stuff, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Intellectual property rights, especially between star systems, would very much have to become like a stronger force.
Yeah.
It would be, because that's their sole way to trade, essentially. If you don't, because it's hard to send resources, it's much more energy efficient to just use the resources you have locally, even if they're in a very unusable form from what we would consider on Earth, right? I mean, if you've got, say, something that requires some specific molecule, and you only have other molecules, but the constituent atoms are the same, then you would, even if it's a very energetic very energetic chemical reaction, you would still want to do that, as opposed to bringing something over from a neighboring star system, because again, bringing something over from a neighboring star system would require, say, a nuclear reaction. And a nuclear reaction is always going to be more energetic than a chemical reaction. But yeah, people are going to be very concerned about intellectual property rights. I don't think they would use the execution method as China did to protect their silkworms, but you could see some very, very severe laws on that, I imagine. I mean, right now it's just like cease and desist, which is just like, please stop or we'll sue you and take all your money. But in the future, it could likely be a crime that gets you sent to jail. That would be the space pirates, right? They would be the intellectual property pirates. I mean, that's already today. Yeah, there are more pirates in terms of intellectual property on the internet, Many more pirates in that sense today than there are in the other sense. In
Morgan Freeman and Jack Black and Mike Myers and who else was there? I forgot the other person, but they're all sitting around the campfire and they're all just
Seth Rogen, right?
And Seth Rogen,
Yep.
And they're all just sitting around and they're just coming up with ideas that are clearly stolen.
Hey, you want an illegal warp drive?
Yeah. They're
like, oh no!
Hey guys, I just
came up. You've got a bootleg warp drive. Oh my god!
Hey guys, I just came up with this idea. Basically, it's called "We're Going Back to the Past."
Yep.
It's the story of Doc McFly and Marty McBrown. They go back to the past. Except the thing is that he can't survive in the past because of something he did. So his parents never met. So his leg is disappearing, and he has to save it by playing Miserloo at a party.
Yep. What an interesting and new story. Yeah. So it's just interesting. I mean, the intellectual property trade. That's going to be the big business of the future, of the far, far future of interstellar travel.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think of anything else.
I think that's pretty much it for trade.
Yeah, it's really interesting with the internet, I would say, right now.
Yeah.
The copyright protections. Like, there are some copyright protections that I'm a little suspicious of, I guess, because basically the idea of copyright is that it's supposed to protect your market from being infringed upon. But there's often instances on the internet where it's like something is being used in a different way, right? I mean, that was the sort of, that it's just fair use, I guess. There's a lot of issues around that right now, how fair use is not being enforced properly, as in like companies are often allowed to remove like pieces of media that they don't like, even though it's like, this isn't infringing on your market. Like say a movie review. Sometimes people will do a movie review and show like 30 seconds of a clip from the movie. And that's supposed to be allowed under fair use. But then the company that made the movie says, you are infringing on our market. And so it's like, basically the idea is if the movie review prevents someone from seeing the movie, then the market has been infringed upon. But usually people don't watch a movie review in order to not watch a movie, right? Yeah. So those will be interesting debates in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, now we get to War and Diplomacy, War and Peace by Tolstoy. This is what everyone came for, isn't it? Star Wars, everyone wants that.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to talk about the Star Wars. And here, I mean, wars between star systems. So how might this occur? And this is what I was alluding to earlier, is that if you declare independence from the union that you are in, and if that is illegal within your union, then the process is going to be very, very strange. So say, again, I talked about this before in a previous episode, but say Alpha Centauri and the Sun are part of the same union, and Alpha Centauri decides to secede. It would take 4 years for the message to get to the Sun. And if the Sun were to reject that, it would take a little while longer, at minimum 6 years, for them to send troops over. It could likely take even longer because Alpha Centauri could, the laser highway is how you would get something to go across in only 6 years. So Alpha Centauri would likely preemptively shut down their laser highway, and because they don't want to get invaded. So then it could take 8 to 10 years because you need your own fuel. So the troops get there, and it's been over a decade since independence has been declared. And Alpha Centauri's society has been behaving as if it were independent for the previous decade, which, again, now they have to deal with a war. It would be very, very strange and long and drawn out. And I think warfare in space between star systems, I think is very unlikely personally.
Yeah.
I think within a star system, it's a lot more likely. I think there could be a lot of interplanetary warfare that gets interesting. But between star systems, I see it as very unlikely for a few reasons. First, technological updates are a lot more effective. The embargoes, the technological embargoes. Because think about it. Say that the Alpha Centaurians declare independence and their population is only 1% as massive, or say 10% as massive as the population of the solar system. Mm-hmm. You could say, we could fight them now when we're on a sort of same level of technological technological level of development. But you could say, all right, everyone, Alpha Centauri has seceded, so we are now embargoing them of intellectual property. Let the embargo fester for 50 years, and now they're 50 years behind in tech. So you can easily conquer them, right? You could just walk in with your 50 years advanced, laser guns and be like, all right, get out of here. You're under our control again now, But of course, that would be 50 years later, which makes the wait even longer and makes the sort of continued desire to bring them back into the Union less extreme. But again, in terms of getting people to do what you want them to do, I believe economic sanctions are a lot more effective.
Yeah. So just exactly how you put it. It's going to be so much more likely to be within a star system. For all those reasons. But
yeah, even if you were to have it between star systems, you could have things like the 100 Years' War, how we have stuff like that on Earth, and that's like considered a long time. That would probably be the normal time scale of a war in interstellar space.
Yeah. And that's another thing that will keep improving or will keep advancing is war. The
Yeah.
quote of war never
Oh yeah.
changes. I
Yep.
I would I would kind of disagree, just because eventually, I mean, kind of like in the movie Avatar, the blue people,
Mhm.
not the M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, yeah. The
Um,
better one.
yeah, the better one.
Cameron. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, them as an avatar, right? So they would
Mm.
just walk around and do stuff. If you did that with soldiers, where they were just linked up to robots or something like
Mm.
that, then
Oh, that's true.
then bloodless wars could be fought.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
oil was spilled across the battlefield.
exactly.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. But yeah, in terms of like the sort of interstellar warfare, because it would be interesting. Imagine sort of war between like across multiple star systems. You could have a campaign to like advance and claim another star system could take a decade between opposing forces, right?
Hmm.
Like think of like, World War II, like or World War One campaigns, like, the Battle of the Bulge or whatever, right? That
Hmm.
took say a few months. In this reality, if it's like the Battle of Wolf 355, right, which is like a star, that would be a decades long battle, which is crazy for just a battle within a larger context of war. Um, but again, because it takes such a long time to transport materials, like what would you really want, I guess, in terms of motives for warfare? That's another thing. Because again,
Yeah.
you're not looking for the material resources of that star system. Like in terms of modern warfare, like not the game, but like in terms of I mean, we're moving away from this already, but up until 1900, the main purpose of warfare was we don't have enough land for crops. We want more land. We will conquer that land. Or we do not have enough land for mining. These people have a lot of land that is filled with gold, so we will conquer it. Right? That was the reason that people went to war in the past. In the 1900s, it became more of like an ideological struggle, especially once you got into the Cold War. It was like communists. We do not like communists. So it's just interesting the motives of warfare because it we're already moving away from the sort of resources war, and that will continue in space because if you conquer a star system, it's not like you gain their resources because again, it takes such a long time to bring their resources back to the home world, right? So it's like, why even bother? All you really want is their intellectual property. And war could, this is an interesting one. Going to war just because greatest technological advancements occurred during warfare. I mean, think about World War I and World War II, right?
Hmm.
Like the atom bomb. Imagine you declare war on someone solely for the sake of now that they're being declared war on, they're like, oh no, we need to develop some technology. And then you go over there and just like steal their property.
Yep.
Like that would be an interesting that could be a sort of like cynical war, how now we have like, oh, we're only in the Middle East for oil, kind of things like that.
Hmm.
You could say like, oh, you only declared war on Alpha Centauri for the intellectual property. So you could have something like that,
Yeah.
which is very interesting. Uh, but yeah, not a lot of reasons to go to war in the future between star systems. It would mostly just be an interplanetary thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could have ideological wars, I guess, depending on like human. Because the thing is, I guess it would be like another possibility would be, say, whichever is your preferred economic system, right? Communism or capitalism.
Hmm.
You could say our economic system is more efficient in terms of creating intellectual property. So we could say like, oh, they're communists and that is slowing down their intellectual property development. So we are going to invade them and force them to be capitalist for the sake of intellectual property development. But that's sort of unlikely because going to war like that is like trying to occupy some sort of territory will sort of reduce their productivity in terms of intellectual property. I mean, during warfare, it increases. And again, you could have those cynical wars where it's like you go for war just, you go to war just for the sake of creating intellectual property, but in terms of going to war to like force them to change their ways, it would be just kind of dumb, you know, because you're like, you know what, they'll develop their intellectual property and we want to gain from it. It would just be simpler to allow them to do their own thing for the most part. You could do, say, interstellar assassinations. You could say, this leader, this dictator, is going to slow the growth of their intellectual property, so we're going to off the dictator, right? And just establish a new regime. You could have sort of clandestine operations like that, but it's just, for the most part, it's just simpler to leave them be. Leave other star systems be. Let them do their own thing so that you can just sort of get their intellectual property. You can't really maximize efficiency. So yeah, war is going to be less likely. And then diplomacy, again, you want to keep generally friendly relations so that you can engage in trade with them, so that you can get their intellectual property. Because all they have to do is say, you are aggressors, we are not going to trade with you, we're not going to give you our intellectual property, and then you're sort of like, you're out. So you want to agree with them. And so this is an interesting sort of future where the richest nations and the most powerful nations are the ones that are the most scientific. I like that kind of future. You know?
Yeah.
The most powerful nations and the richest ones are the ones that can produce the best intellectual property. So the ones that make either the best movies and plays or the ones that make the best technological advancements. It'll be interesting. So yeah, now let's go to law and justice. So interstellar law would have to be...
I will go close my window because there are sirens outside. Sorry.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, so interstellar law. Again, we've been talking about this for a while, but you can't really have much interstellar law other than basic human rights sort of things. And I can't imagine that there would be much in terms of interstellar law other than just, we don't like what you're doing right now, so we are going to go to war over it, you know? Either way, the process would take many, many decades, at least. You know, it would take a few decades at least, which is pretty rough. I don't know. What do you think of interstellar law and justice? Oh, I guess he's not. Anyway, I can't really see him. But it would just be difficult to have international interstellar courts, because how do you operate? You can only operate, first of all, on the very loose, like military union, just the general human rights conventions that you have, and any trial would take many decades. So it would have to be a very minute system. Because the thing is, if people are violating, like if one star system is violating human rights, it's not like taking them to court over 30 years is really going to like, they'll continue to violate human rights for like 30 years while the legal system plays out. And then once you come to a decision that's like, oh, you're violating human rights, you must stop, they could just say no, and then you have to invade them and go to war. I feel like it might just be, or, you know, just sanctions. I feel like it would just be much more efficient of sort of instant type of things. Interstellar law could consist more of no actual centralized Supreme Court, but rather every star system has its own court, and you get like some sort of refugee from a neighboring star system comes over to your star system, and it takes them, of course, 6 years to get there. And they say, oh, this star system is violating human rights. You must sanction them. And then you would have a local trial between, you know, say the refugee and say the ambassador from the neighboring star system. And then the decision would just be like, okay, we're going to sanction them now. That could be the quickest sort of way to do it. But again, that would also take 6 years. And if anything's super egregious, you don't even need someone to come over. You could just, as soon as you get the information that they're doing unspeakable crimes, you could say, we are not going to give you any more intellectual property, and you're out. But again, that's just like it's very slow. And there's not much you can do to sort of bring international criminals to justice, interstellar criminals, you know?
Yeah.
It's just got to be on a star system to star system basis. I guess that's the key point here. So much of modern governance just does not work whatsoever in interstellar space.
Yeah.
And let's see, like I'm just trying to think. Because something that might happen, right, is that you could have some sort of dictator comes to power, they are violating human rights, and then, you know, some opposing dictator, or not dictator, but just, you know, the opposing forces of democracy, say, overthrow them within 3 years. What would you do? Would you sanction them? I mean, as soon as you received the information that the dictator was doing bad things, which would be like after the dictator had already been deposed, you'd say, we're declaring sanctions now. We're not going to respect this. But then 3 years later, you'd receive information, oh, wait, the dictator got deposed. Okay, we'll stop sanctioning you. And then another 4 years later, you receive, like, because you sanctioned them, another dictator has taken power. Because economic troubles tend to lead to, like, authoritarianism, right? Mm-hmm. Like, look at Weimar Germany, right? So you could have a situation where your sanctions, like, you could have this sort of cyclical back and forth. It would just be so complicated. Everything would have to be super slow to be cohesive and make sense. But the problem with things going slowly is that in the meantime, as things are going slowly, miscarriages of justice are taking place. People's rights are being violated. How do you balance those two forces of you don't want to act you don't want to be so rash, right? But at the same time, you don't want to allow these things to happen. And it's just like, it's like an untenable situation. The fact is, the neighboring star system is just too far away for you to meaningfully protect their citizens. I guess that's the basic problem. It has to be just sort of every star system is responsible for protecting its own citizens, and if it doesn't, we're just going to look the other way and just be a military union. That's one possibility. But of course, that's a very grim sort of possibility. You don't really want to look at that, you know, because people would not want to be in a union with another star system that is, say, practicing slavery, right? And I suppose the longer that a process, again, the long time periods of the law, is that if something like that were to persist long enough, then you could see action actually occurring with sanctions and stuff. But any sort of human rights violations on the span of a decade are likely to go unresponded to and sort of unpunished, I would say. You know, because by the time you find out it's happening, it might have already stopped, which is just, it's like very difficult. It makes interventionism nigh impossible.
Yeah.
So that is how it is. So the reason you would do sanctions is going to be because they are doing something that negatively affects your nation. So Proxima Centauri can oppress its citizens all it wants, and you won't stop sending them intellectual property. But as soon as they start, say, violating your rights as the solar system, then you intervene. That might be the state of interstellar affairs. But it's difficult to say, of course. So then we get to resource management.
Yep.
And again, every star system is just so, like, plentiful. But you might get sort of international agreements or interstellar agreements.
That is cool. The way I could, what game is that? Yeah.
I do not know. I just looked it up. Altace 1.
Oh, that's the name of the planet.
Yeah.
Here, I keep talking. I will do research.
Okay, so interstellar resource management would likely be for rare space objects, I would say. There's no raw material that you can really manage that well. But say a stellar mass black hole flies roughly close to a ton of star systems. it might be beneficial to make use of that stellar mass black hole. And different star systems might make claims to that. So you would need a sort of international interstellar collaboration on who has rights to this rare space object. What are we going to do with it? What are our policies? Say a very massive star that is about to go supernova passes through your system. It could be a sort of mutual responsibility of, we have to divert this star. We have to get it out of here. And you could do that with the Shikhatov thruster. I think I've talked about that before, but there are ways that you can alter the motions of stars. So say a neutron star passes by. What do you do? That is the question. It's mostly going to be about rare stellar objects rather than something as basic as hydrogen, or even something like hydrazine, complex molecules. Even something like, the native Alaskan salmon of blah, blah, blah. Like, you can't manage that resource on an interstellar scale. It's just going to be up to each star system. But when it comes to rare interstellar objects, then you might have some cooperation, some agreement of like, everyone has equal rights to the stellar mass black hole. Everyone has equal rights to the neutron star that passes through, whatever use those objects might have in the future. I really don't know what kind of uses those objects might have, but that's the question for the future. So there's going to be, there'll have to be some sort of collaboration on that.
I'm searching for what game this is.
Have you found it?
I have not found it.
All right. Let's move on. Do you want?
Yeah. But I will find it later.
Okay.
Unless I did just find it. Hold on.
Oh, did you find it? Yeah, because it's starting to get a little late here. But
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I'm just saying.
No, it's not Stellaris.
Your sake as well as mine. Not Stellaris.
Not Stellaris.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about resource management here?
I think it's going to be, again, mainly focused on inside a solar system, inside a star system. Again, with the cities, the majority of resources, would go there, and then the guys that want to live on their own communities would, go in from time to time and like pick stuff up and then head back and never speak to anyone.
Never talk to them again.
Yeah. So it would kind of trickle down that way. But yeah, other than that, I feel like this kind of stuff, in some ways we can look to Earth, and other ways, it's a little different on the entire galactic scale. That's going to be very strange. Like, if there's only like one planet that has one resource, it's going to be a nightmare, because especially if the Galactic Empire decides that they want to get it to everyone like equally, that's going to be a nightmare.
Yep. So before we move on to the next segment, what do you say? Space communism or space capitalism?
As 128 seconds, I tend not to take a political stand.
Okay, fair. But it's interesting. Isn't Star Trek all just communist?
Well, they have no scarcity, so
That's true.
It's a utopian society. It's not necessarily a communist society.
Okay. I've always heard people say like Star Trek is communist. But yeah. Also, not taking political stances here either. I tend not to do that. But it's just funny, I think, because you always sort of get the. I feel like in space, sort of sci-fi galactic things, it's always either like sort of utopian or dystopian. Like you've either got the Empire from Star Wars, which is super like Darwinian essentially, to the point of like hyper capitalist, you know what I mean, like, but then also authoritarian, but like Darwinian, I guess, where it's like, oh, the weak shall die type thing in Star Wars. But then you've got Star Trek, which is like, ooh, we're just gonna make food out of nothing. So it's just funny. Oh, here's a question. What do you think about the Prime Directive? I think it has got to be one of the worst policies that a space society could adopt.
The Prime Directive being the
The one that's like, we will not contact any intelligent species until they develop like interstellar travel. That was the Prime Directive, I believe.
yeah, that's kind of dumb.
Star Trek. Yeah, I agree. Because they're like, oh, we're preserving the culture, or like we're not going to enforce.
Yeah, that was.
We're not going to enforce our beliefs on them or something. And I'm like, I don't think. Imagine, right? Imagine you are an alien species, okay? And as your society develops, naturally, over the course of your history, there are dictators, there are genocides, right? Horrible things happen. And then you develop interstellar travel finally, just to find out that there has been some alien galactic federation that has been watching you for 1,000 years and decided not to intervene because of their Prime Directive. I imagine you would be very salty, right? Wouldn't you be like, what the hell?
Yeah, I feel like that kind of spins into a bigger debate that we have here on Earth. So again, I'm gonna try to remain kind of in the center.
Okay.
But yeah.
No, I just mean just Prime Directive.
Yeah, just Prime Directive stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
Like it should just be the benefit of all life. You know, if an alien came down right now and gave us, you know, life extension technology, I'd be like, yeah, hell yeah.
Right?
You know?
That's another thing. If it were to take until interstellar travel, and then they contacted us and were like, oh, here's all the technology, we would be like, why did you not spare us this human suffering over the centuries? And they would be like, Prime Directive? And we would probably say, you know what, we're not going to follow that Prime Directive. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They'd be like, no, you can't violate the Prime Directive. And we'd be like, screw you, we're going to violate the Prime Directive all we want. We developed interstellar travel, no help to you. So you know what, we're going to make our own Prime Directive, right? But anyway, I digress. Let's go back to the thing. So galactic politics. So this isn't intergalactic politics. This is just sort of within the galaxy, over the span of the whole galaxy, because a galaxy is 100,000 light years across. Whereas we've sort of been talking about unions that are maybe 50 light years across. So how might the galactic theater work? What is the galactic, you know, we've got geopolitics, right? Mm-hmm. Galactopolitics, I don't know. How might that work? So let's start with alliances. So alliance networks would be sort of interesting. Again, I mean, we've talked about war a lot, but the larger the scale you get, the more that's just got to be a mutual understanding, sort of like an NAP, like, you know, the libertarian, the non-aggression principle.
Yeah.
I can imagine a sort of interstellar, like almost like on a galactic scale type of union that is literally just their only principle is the NAP, where they say, do not attack us and we will not attack you. And if you do attack us, then we will attack you. Literally, that's it. Because once you get beyond this 50 light year scale, once you get out here, we're getting to spans that are, you know, hundreds of years of time to contact people hundreds of light years away. And the galaxy is 100,000 light years across. That's 100,000 years to conduct diplomacy. 2 star systems on the opposite sides of the galaxy. How would they even interact? How would they even meaningfully be in an alliance or be enemies? Like, what would that even mean? You know, imagine you happen upon some star system on the ring of the galaxy. And you say, so what's your deal? What's your deal, star system? What are you all about? And they say, we hate the dang, you know, VTT-29 system, the VTT-29 system. And you're like, where is the VTT-29 system? And you're like, it's 100,000 light years away on the opposite side of the galaxy.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? How are they going to conduct warfare with each other? Like, they send their troops, and by the time the troops get there, they have developed into like telepathic beings, because we're getting to the stage that like minor evolution can take place over the course of 100,000 years. 100,000 years ago, I don't think humans had language. I think it's something like 75,000 years ago is where a human would be indistinguishable from one today in terms of intelligence. So it's like, and language No language has existed, no written language. I mean, written language has only existed for 14,000 years, and none of the original ones are still spoken today. I mean, try to talk to someone in Sumerian and they don't understand. They look at you with a blank stare. I mean, it's ridiculous. These people do not know Sumerian anymore.
Crazy.
How dare they? It's these dang kids
We live in a
do not
society.
understand Sumerian. These dang kids, they say, oh, why would you need to talk Sumerian? And it's like, do they not understand the value of the traditional language of Sumerian? But anyway, point being, intragalactic alliances, what is that? How would that work? It would be rough. I mean, I do not know. It's got to come down to just local jurisdictions, because I forget who said it. Someone said it. People have repeated it in different works, that the past is a foreign nation, or the future is a foreign nation. In time travel works, they like to talk about that, right? People usually say something to that effect. But it's really palpable here, because you can't think of the galaxy as this vast plane. You have to think of it as a vast cylinder. You have to think of the temporal dimension, right? Your neighbors that are 100 light years away are not your neighbors now. They are your neighbors 100 years from now. When you think about them, when you think about your policies toward them, when you think about whether you want to ally with them or fight against them, you are thinking of how they will be 100 years from now, not how they are, or how you see them. And how you see them is 100 years in the past. So you really have to think about the timescape here.
I was gonna say, talk about like game theory. You need to like game out your opponent 100 years into the future.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Like, you could have like a star system 100 light years away says, "We're declaring war on you," and you're like, "Oh no, this is horrible," and you only find out 100 years later. But then you find out 10 years later, no troops are showing up, and you receive the, "Sorry about that. We do not declare war on you anymore." And you're just left there like, okay, well, all right then. I guess we'll just continue going about our business. It's just utter chaos. I do not know how such a vast society could possibly function. It has to just be local law. That's all that can exist in interstellar space. I guess that's the sort of conclusion I'm coming to here, is that once you get beyond a few dozen light years, the rule of law breaks down. The galaxy is a chaotic place, isn't it?
Quite.
The space pirate hippies. You know, if they can stay ahead of, like, I don't know, the law, because if they go fast enough, then every new place that they are going to doesn't know of their existence, and then they can commit their crimes, right? Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. All right, next, so we've got borders. So how might borders work between these large interstellar unions? And the reason that this is questionable is that these borders will shift over time, because every star in the Milky Way galaxy is moving with its own independent velocity. If you look at the nearest star to Earth, right now it is Proxima Centauri. However, a few thousand years ago, it was not Proxima Centauri. And a few thousand years hence, it shall not be Proxima Centauri. So these borders are shifting over time. So 1 century, your nearest neighbor is, or say 1 millennia, your nearest neighbor is this group of people, and now it's this group of people. You can't have any permanent alliances that are sort of land-based empires, because if you try to keep them together, they're going to drift apart. And eventually, they'll be spread thousands of light years apart, so any meaningful communication breaks down. Alliances would either have to be fluid, such that, like, you know, you change your alliances based on who your neighbors are over time, or the alliances could be more ideologically based, and you literally just have, like, a third of the star systems are, you know, capitalist, a third of the star systems are communist. You've got some anarchic, you know, groups, and then some, like, totalitarian groups, right? And they're just evenly mixed together, which would be just a fascinating sort of situation. And it's like whenever the totalitarian group passes by your star system, all the neighbors would probably say, okay, guys, prepare. Just in case if they decide to attack us, we're all going to defend ourselves. Sort of like crusaders or like pillagers are coming through your stretch of the universe. And so you decide to sort of band together with whoever your neighbors happen to be at the time and say, we will not allow you to do this. So yeah, the borders are going to be all mixed together. So next we've got, or do you have anything to say about that? About the borders?
About borders, again, I'm really liking this microchip idea. You get cars manufactured in, or cars, you know what I'm talking about. You get ships manufactured in one star system where if they cross, for example, say you're going from the, what was the star system you brought up earlier? The TT...
VTT-29.
Oh, yeah, the VTT-29 system.
Not a real place.
Very infamous system. For example, VTT-29 manufactured starships. If they cross over into MX-5 territory, they detonate immediately.
Okay. All right, then. So now we get to migration. And this is just an interesting one because, again, it takes a long time to go between stars. So trying to move to a different star system might be something that takes your whole life. But, like, it's just interesting. It all comes back to the time delay. It all comes back to the time delay. Because say that your star system is undergoing an economic depression. And so you say, okay, I am going to leave. We are in financial turmoil. By the time you get to the next star system, in say 5-6 years, the depression might have recovered in your original star system, and the star system that you're going to might immediately fall into a depression as soon as you go there. Could you imagine that? Just the bad luck of that?
Yeah.
Like your star system falls into a depression, and after a few years you're like, okay, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go to the next star system. And then when you get there, they're like, oh, we're doing great. Uh-oh, what was that? Oh, okay, the stock market has just failed. Like, oh, geez. It would be interesting, just because of the vast sort of distances and just the vast expanse of space, and just basically the idea that probabilities, once expanded enough, are guaranteed to happen. You know what I'm saying? It would be an interesting story of just the least lucky person in the entire galaxy, right?
Yeah.
And they could theoretically go to like 12 different star systems, and each time they show up, there's a depression. But then they could become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Out of sheer bad luck, now it has become known among different star systems. The information has gotten out there that if this person comes to your star system, you're going to fall into a depression. And think about market confidence, right? Mm-hmm. The stock market is literally just about people's confidence in it. So if enough people believe that this individual is cursed, even though it's really just up to chance, right? Then it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and anywhere he goes will just
the guy would have his own show where it's like kind of like a Shark Tank thing, except it's kind of reverse. You have like 4 guys talking to him, all trying to just get him to go to the other person's system.
Exactly.
And they're like at the end of it, they're like, "So Paul, where are you thinking of going?" And he's like, well, I was thinking about
You could have like insider trading. You could have them say, okay, if you go to our enemy's star system, we will buy you like a giant mansion there. Like, it's like, okay.
But whatever thing he decided to do, they're like, where are you thinking of going? He's like, I was thinking about VTT, and everyone in the VTT 29 system, just immediate riot. The society falls, and Paul gets there and he's like, this does not look like the brochure. Exactly. He's walking around and he's like, kind of a riot everywhere.
Yep.
What's the price of bread? Oh, $5 trillion. Damn. At least that's better than the last place.
Yep.
But
yeah, exactly. But so it's like, I don't know, migration is just difficult because the standards of living or just the conditions of any given country. I mean, imagine upheaval and things like that. It's like You could see like, oh, 100 light years away, there's this beautiful utopian society. It's like perfect. Everyone like lives in a mansion. Everyone's super happy. Like it's Scandinavia basically. It's just Norway as a star system, right? And it's like everyone's like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm gonna move here. And after 100 years, by the time you get there, it has devolved into a complete like anarchy hellscape, and you're just like, oh. So the idea of migration between star systems just becomes very risky. You're essentially gambling every time you step on a interstellar vessel. The best possibilities for migration would be an empty star system, a new star system, because then it's like, okay, great, I can now colonize this star system, and there can't be a depression if there are literally no other people there, right? So that's just an interesting idea. So next we get galactic scale trade. And galactic scale trade, more than just a few light years, again, it's got to be intellectual property. But even that begins to break down, because it's like the technology that you're going to receive from a star that is 10,000 light years away is going to be pretty bad, don't you think? Like surely over the course of 10,000 years, you can independently develop that technology on your own, right? Like surely your scientists, if given 10,000 years, could develop that technology before the information gets to you. So distant star systems can't have much meaningful contact. At that point, it just becomes only entertainment. And even entertainment kind of breaks down, because it's like, different cultures. Although you could have a sort of classics machine, right? So imagine this. 2 star systems that are 10,000 light years apart. Somehow they come to an agreement that is like, we will send each other our entertainment, and bam, instant generation of new classic literature. Because think about it, right now here on Earth, there's only a limited amount of classic literature. No one's creating new classic literature, right? Mm-hmm. There's not like there's the Iliad. I was about to say there's no Iliad 2, but there is already, the Odyssey, right? But there's no what is that old one? The Epic of Gilgamesh. There's no Epic of Gilgamesh 2. We want the new Epic of Gilgamesh. Yeah, Epic of Gilgamesh sequel when?
Come on, creators.
Right? Come on.
Where's the fan service?
This is ridiculous.
The creators have offered
you guys do
no
not
statements.
Care about the fans. Yeah. You guys do not care about the fans. You have not released a new Epic of Gilgamesh. You have not released any patches to the bugs in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is ridiculous. But the point is, you could have an interesting sort of trade setup where different star systems share their entertainment of the time, because they know that 10,000 years later it will become new classic works. It'll be classic literature, which is just interesting. Or vintage movies, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine it's like there's only a limited number of Charlie Chaplin films, and if you want more,
I love Charlie Chaplin films. I was watching them the other night. Just laughing.
Nice.
He makes me laugh, man.
Nice. But yeah, imagine if we had a interstellar neighbor, a star system that was at the same level of technological advancement as we were, except they were 100 light years away. We would be receiving movies made in their equivalent of 1921. Mm-hmm. And so we could get some nice old-timey films, some new old-timey films. That would be the sort of appeal of a galactic scale trade, but that's really all you could do. There could be a sort of mass movement of goods, a sort of mass centralization. And this is something we haven't talked about yet, but I think we'll talk about more in future episodes, is that since we have theoretical ways to move star systems, like the Shikatov thruster, right? You could move an entire star. There might come a point where, like 2 star systems that are near each other, but they're 4 light years apart, say Proxima Centauri, right? Yeah. Say Proxima Centauri says this whole 4 light years apart thing is inconvenient. Well, how about we set up a Shikatov thruster and begin inching towards the solar system? You could get to the point where the whole Alpha Centauri system is only, a few thousand astronomical units away, and we're locked in a sort of a huge binary orbit, and we're closer to each other. And so information only takes a few months to get between us. If you could get to that sort of standpoint, then you could very much have an interstellar empire. It would just be artificially close together. And here's the thing, it's sort of like conglomeration. It's like accretion in the early solar system, right? You started with individual rocks, right? And one rock would hit another rock and they'd stick together. And then as they got more and more massive, eventually they could pull in more material under their own gravity. And that is how the Earth formed. So you could get artificial star clusters where you've got 5 or 6 stars in the first place that just happen to be really close together, and they decide to alter their orbital paths so that they'll stay together, and say that they happen to be particularly wealthy, say they happen to have particularly good intellectual property. Then you might have a 7th star system that says, hey, can we join you guys? Can we come closer? And that would be a snowballing effect. And eventually you might get these massive artificial star clusters that are artificially close together and might be able to hold an empire together easier than you would in just natural interstellar space. But we'll talk about that more next episode, or not next episode. I think the episode after that, once we talk about the Kardashev scale. That's somewhere, yeah, we're going to talk about that eventually. So we'll talk about that there. But yeah, so that's Galactic Trade. Oh, we have chat from Futurology. I do not know how long ago this was, but Futurology says, such a fascinating live stream, guys. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Futurology.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and guys, definitely check out Futurology's channel.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about to
You
hit
probably know.
100K.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You guys are more likely to
fantastic.
know Futurology than to know us. But, well, I guess you're already here, so of course you know us. So I guess maybe not. But we collaborated with Futurology a few months, 9 months ago or something, a while ago. We made that. The video on Venus on this channel was a collaboration. Definitely go check them out. Although the Futurology doesn't need the shout out from us, I guess is what I'm saying, because we've got
he has a fantastic channel and fantastic content.
Channel.
Definitely check him out.
Yeah, exactly. Go check that out. But yeah, so that's Galactic Trade. That's it. So now let's go to Galactic War. Imagine a galactic scale war. Could you imagine that? That would be terrible, probably. But you could, because again, 100,000 years to cross a star system. Imagine a huge sort of brewing, looming intergalactic conflict. Because if you think about World War II or World War I, you could point out the period of, say, 20 years of buildup before the war where tensions were rising, and then the 5-year period of the outbreak of war. Imagine an intergalactic war, say 3 million years of tension building up, and then a 750,000 year war. God. That is crazy, right? That's dystopian. That's catastrophic, right? Just think about that. Right? That's crazy to think about. But you could say for World War I, you could say, the main, if you've done that, the whole thing about militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, say that, that process began in sort of the 1890s, I believe. But imagine that were to happen, right? So you have some sort of looming conflict. Say it's an ideological conflict, or sort of a conflict between empires and ways of doing things that slowly brews over the course of millions of years and eventually releases with hundreds of thousands of years of bloodshed on a galaxy-wide scale. That would be pretty horrifying.
Yep.
I just don't see it happening, I guess, because it just feels like it's too large a system to really interact with itself. I don't know. The galaxy just, in terms of human timescales, of course, if we were all different sorts of beings, if we were all I don't know, immortal beings or perceived time at a slower rate, then it might be different. But it's just, it doesn't fit in with the human scale. That's, I guess, the point here. The galaxy, interstellar space, does not match humanity. So humanity might alter itself, though. It's interesting to think. Imagine we all, say, become sort of artificial intelligences, right?
Yeah.
Whether by the AI comes in and kills us all, or via symbiosis, right? Then AIs that might be running computers at a slower rate, say that they live at a rate of, 1/1,000,000th as fast as we live, right? Because you could have that. So they perceive 1,000,000 seconds as 1 second. So that's like they perceive 11 days as 1 second. Then the galaxy would only be something that takes about a month to cross, which is interesting. What do you think about that?
Yeah, man.
A different sort of species.
Just, yeah, with the whole diversification thing, it's just open to so many possibilities.
Yeah.
And, going back to the main point with the galactic scale war.
Yeah.
I could just see two very angry people starting a galactic scale war because, I just think that would just be kind of hysterical, very horrifying, but kind of hysterical if it started with something as small as, between the galaxies. And now picture this and tell me this wouldn't result in galactic war.
Okay. Yeah.
We have two galaxies. We have Galaxy A and Galaxy B, right? I just came up with that off the dome, original names. The leader, the Emperor of Galaxy A, sends a request out to Galaxy B. He says, hey, what you up to? And it already takes about 200 years for that message to reach the other galaxy.
Okay.
And so 200 years later, he returns to his computer and he sees he was left on red.
Ooh.
Galactic War.
Yeah. Well, here I'm thinking more war on a galactic scale rather than intergalactic.
Yeah, I know. But so within a galaxy, I could still see the same thing kind of happening.
Yeah.
But it would probably. I really do see the most likely thing is ideological.
Well, imagine this, right?
Yes.
This scenario, right? A red dwarf nationalist goes in and assassinates the heir to the throne of the Orion Spur Empire.
But only after he was grabbing some Mite Bites at a cafe and saw him pass by.
Right?
Yes.
And so then the Orion Spur Empire declares war on the red dwarf, the individual red dwarf, and then the Milky Way Union of Red Dwarfs says, we are the protector of all red dwarfs, and we shall not allow you to declare war on them. So we will defend our red dwarf allies. But then there's a complex series of alliances. And so the Kaiser of the Sagittarius Arm Empire says, oh, we've got your back, Orion Spur. But then you've got the Aries Republic and the constitutional monarchy of, right? And they say, oh, we're going to side with the Red Dwarf Union. And eventually, the United States of the Galactic Bulge say, okay, we're going to step in to make the galaxy safe for democracy. And then you've got the peace conference. And then you've got the president of the United States of the Galactic Bulge comes up with 14 points on how the treaty should lay out. And they decide to make a League of Nations. And the League of Nations, the United States of the Galactic Bulge, does not enter the League of Nations because of political troubles.
And possibly because that president of the United States of the Bulge was a poor leader.
Yes. And then the treaty puts very harsh sanctions on the Sagittarius Arm Empire, and the Kaiser must abdicate. And so that they become the Sagittarius Republic. But they fall into
Is
economic
inflation an issue in the Sagittarius Republic?
Yes, hyperinflation is an issue in the Sagittarius Republic. And so then some dictator comes to power.
How long were you going to take that up to?
I do not know. And so then the Soviet Union of the Red Dwarfs and the United States of the Galactic Bulge fight a proxy war in the yada yada.
Which is the name of the system. The yada yada system.
The yada yada system. And the president resigns, actually, over a Watergate scandal.
Wow.
I don't even know. The Milky Gate. The Milky Gate scandal. And then, I do not know. We can keep going. This is just fun.
Hopefully that charming president of the United States of the Bulge, hopefully nothing bad happens to him.
Hopefully nothing bad ever happens. Oh wait, now we're skipping around. Now
yeah, we are. So I went backwards.
Yeah, now we're going back.
Went backwards. Sorry.
Yeah, hopefully nothing bad happens to the charming young president of the United States of the Bulge. He is only 1,000 years old, youngest president ever of the United States of the Galactic Bulge.
He's very charismatic. I hear
very
he knows
charismatic.
Marlatrix Mantro.
Anyway, so we don't have to go into just a thinly veiled metaphor for just world history, but
I would call that a simile.
yeah, it's more of a simile. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was entertaining. I hope you enjoyed that.
I did.
So let's go to final thoughts. So final thoughts. The intergalactic sea, the depth of the intergalactic sea, provides us with an insurmountable barrier, and that is the speed of light. And the result of that is no society can really form that is that cohesive on these scales. It just becomes increasingly difficult, I would say. It's almost impossible. I mean, isn't there that theory that like empires only last 250 years on Earth?
I have heard
you ever heard that theory?
Yeah.
Maybe you've got something on the galactic. Like I feel like there's
the average age of an empire is 250 years. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, think of it like Rome. The Roman Empire fell into the Byzantines, and then the West Rome, which fell further. I'm not that big on Roman history. I don't know that as much, but the point being, the vast distances between star systems will result in a lot of cultural drift, and that cultural drift is likely to drive empires and unions apart. Yeah. I mean, the United States almost got civil war. It almost fell apart. It's very difficult to keep even the United States together, I would say. As such a large nation of like 330 million people, it's difficult to keep together an empire that covers, a republic, a constitutional republic that covers such a vast area and has such a vast population. That's the difficulty. And it just gets worse with these communication and travel lags because, I mean, imagine the US if it took, 20 years for California to get their delegates into Washington, if it took 30 years for Alaska or Hawaii to get their delegates to Washington, right? And even something as close as Connecticut takes 5 years to get their delegates to Washington. How could we function as a state? How could we function as a union? How'd that work? That is the problem presented by the interstellar scale. And with that, that is my final thought here today.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say, Seb?
Final thought is that I hope to get your vote when I take my position as despot of the Milky Way galaxy. My microtrip strategy, unbeatable. Try and beat it. You might get microchipped.
Given an infinite amount of time, and given an infinite universe,
yes,
at some point and somewhere in this infinite universe, there is a copy of you that is exactly the same as you,
Mm-hmm.
except happens to be the emperor, the despot of a galaxy.
Well, I hope to hear from him soon.
Think about it. If the universe is infinite, then somewhere in that universe, there must be a Sebastian Molino who is despot of some galaxy.
Huh. It's interesting.
Just based on just the odds. Anything with a non-zero probability rises to infinity, well, with 100% over an infinite scale.
So the only me that wouldn't exist would be Sebastian Molino that likes grunge music. So that is my final thought.
Thank you, Sebastian, for being my co-host today, and thank you, Futurology, for watching too.
Yeah.
Definitely
check out his channel. Yeah.
Yeah, check out Futurology. Great videos. I mean, much better than mine, I will say.
No,
much better.
well, you don't. I don't think he would want you to compare them. I think.
Okay.
I think that
he makes videos much more often than I do. That's a fact. So.
That's a fact. But
that's a fact.
Never compare yourself in that way. I've just learned that just keeps you unhappy.
Okay, that's fair actually. But